Sorry that we're running a little bit behind this morning, but I'm sure Chairman Harbin has some very important issues going on in appropriations. So apparently you got problems going on in your committee this morning.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Mr. Chairman, your bill is House Bill 163. If you want to go ahead and explain your bill for the committee.
Well, I will. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's good to be here this morning. And I do apologize for my tardiness. We were trying to move some bills and appropriations, and I had to leave them. But we have the main thrust of this bill, you will see, is on page, well, it's section 2. I don't think I have the exact pages. Mine was printed from a computer this morning. Under, you'll see B, where we're striking. Thank you. It's page 2, line 59. What we're doing is inserting, we are removing the statute of limitations on crimes relating to committed on or after July 1st, 2009, victim violation. These are sexual abuse crimes. You will see the list of the crimes there, and these are for minors or anyone under 16 years of age. The current law says there's a statute of limitations after they turn 16 of 7 years that they have to come forward. This just says these crimes are heinous enough that there should not be a statute of limitations. And this was brought to me, actually, and I'm not going to mention any names, by a young man who can point out his victim and do everything he wants to prove it was his assailant, rather. He was the victim. And point him out and prove it, but there's nothing law enforcement can do because of statute of limitations. And his abuser is a preacher, which is really, I guess, ironic, who's wandering our community and free simply because the law allows him to be free because of the statute of limitations. And the police officers told him, it's not that we don't believe you, there's just nothing we can do. So we're simply just removing that statute of limitations because I think these crimes, against these children, sometimes it's so many years before they have the strength to come forward. And it may be beyond that statute of limitations, and that's just that's not fair to that victim. And I don't think that's the way we want our judicial system to operate, that if you can game the system long enough that the statute of limitations will protect you from committing what I believe is one of the worst offenses you can commit, crimes against children. I'll yield for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any questions for the chairman? Representative Franklin.
Thank you. Chairman Harbin, thank you for bringing the bill, and I think I would doubt that there's anyone on the committee that would dispute the heinousness of these criminal acts. And while it is reprehensible that a predator is able to walk the streets, are you aware of instances where someone might go to say a grief counselor or some other certified professional psychologist and have ideas planted in their minds that they might have somehow been a victim of one of these offenses, and through such counseling come to believe that they really were, and therefore make an allegation against an individual who would be innocent, but the person is so convinced in their mind because of counseling they've received that they really were a victim. How can we protect that innocent person from an allegation if we remove the statute of limitations? Is there some language that you might suggest to us?
Well, I don't know that there's any language or any need for the language, Representative Franklin. I understand what you're saying. That could occur today. Mm-hmm. That could occur today. But after 7 years, if that person is guilty, and or after the statute of limitations has taken effect, and they've gotten away with it, if they're guilty, they can't even be tried. So they can't even be accused. They can't be charged with it, and that's I think where the flaw in the law is. It's not so much those instances could happen. I don't dispute that. They could happen today. I think that our system is good enough. I trust our judicial system that it's good enough that we protect those innocent accused, the innocent or wrongly accused, and I think that we still do a good job of that. But I think that the purpose of my bill is not to try to make it easier just to accuse people. I'm not changing the law. I'm not changing anything except for the statute of limitations. And I'm saying that if they've committed these crimes and these people can prove or give some justifiable reasons to accuse them, then they should be able to be tried at any time. That's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to change the way it's done today. As I said, I trust our judicial system, and I think that it will keep those type instances at bay, and it will prove those wrong when they do occur, and they can simply occur today. But the problem is you have guilty out there who can get away with it just because they've outlasted someone who maybe was too scared to come forward or too embarrassed in some cases. But when they finally do have the strength to come forward, if this timeline has gone far enough, then there's nothing we can do under the legal system.
Representative Levettis.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing this. My only questions are, because I agree, especially when you're dealing with these heinous child molestation cases, and as you well know, from having worked on this issue, that often the victim, the main modus operandi of the perpetrator is to get somebody alone where there's no witnesses and to pick on the least likely victim who's ever going to be willing to testify. And I actually, that's an area where maybe my colleague, Representative Franklin, and I disagree. My only question or maybe concern, and sometimes when we throw in a whole bunch of things, we tend to diminish the importance of some of the other things. So my only question, and I don't want to get in the way of your bill at all, is whether we want to make a lifetime ban on something like sodomy. When I say ban, removing the statute of limitations entirely from something like sodomy, which may or may not involve a child at all, or something like cruelty to children as a lifetime. It's not that these are not, especially when they involve children, not a heinous and terrible thing to do, but something like child molestation, aggravated sodomy, aggravated child molestation, those are, to me, perfectly good examples of things that should never have a statute of limitations because they are up there with rape and murder in my book. But I guess I wonder whether in the three crimes that I was wondering about, the cruelty to children, sodomy, and enticing a child for indecent purposes, if those maybe wouldn't be more appropriate to have the 7-year extension beyond the time that they turn the age of majority and then leave everything else the way it is. And I'm just asking, this is not an amendment, and it's not in any way to get in the way of what you're trying to do, because I support it wholeheartedly.
Well, I mean, we've listed all these because I feel like any time the person is under 16 and these crimes are committed against them, that it was heinous enough that it deserved prosecution at any time. But I will, if it's the will of the committee to amend some of those, if you feel that strongly, I will work with you. But as I stated, I feel that they're all important, and that's why I placed them in here.
Well, and I appreciate you bringing it. I think it's an excellent piece of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Benefield.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. The first is a little technical, and that is Section 2. It's split up into subsections A and B. Is subsection A the intent to just be clear that the law cannot be retroactive?
Yes.
Okay. And my next question with regard to the sodomy, I know the Georgia Supreme Court overturned our sodomy law, and help me with this. I don't think the legislature has ever come back and recrafted that statute to be in compliance. So can we really address the sodomy issue since it's an unconstitutional statute? That's kind of a legal issue, but I'm...
That's a good question, but as we're bringing this is all from the code section. These are code sections that currently exist under the current law, and I think aggravated sodomy is probably the one that we were more concerned with in there.
But the sodomy statute has been declared unconstitutional. So I don't know how enforceable. I don't know.
Well,
Does
There
legislature,
are others here, I
is
think,
it
who would
enforceable?
like to speak on that, and they may can address that.
Okay.
That's exactly where we stand on that. But I believe you're correct in that the Supreme Court did overturn it, and we have not addressed it since then.
And a final question. We actually had a bill very similar to this, I want to say 8 years ago. It was early in my tenure here. And I remember, I want to say Doug Haynes in the Senate was the author. And I remember one of the reasons it was defeated, we had a long discussion about recovered memory syndrome, and there were a lot of concerns, primarily from the defense bar, about some of the evidence coming forward years and years later from people who, there's all sorts of controversy surrounding recovered memory syndrome. I'm sure you're familiar with the issue in working on this bill and whether or not that evidence is sufficient to bring any type of indictment or prosecution. And I'm just interested in whether you looked into that issue, because I know that was a critical factor when we looked at the bill before.
And as I said to Mr. Franklin, that there will be probably instances, just as there are today, in any time where you'll have someone may be wrongly accused, and that can happen. But the substance of this law is that there are those who are should be rightly accused that are right now protected under the law because they chose a victim that was not willing to come forward until later. Yeah. And I think that's unfortunate, because these crimes, I think, are, especially against children, these are the type of crimes that people shouldn't be able to get away with ever. If they can be proven guilty, then I think that whenever we can prove them guilty, they should be punished for the crime.
Can I ask one last question?
Yes.
Are you aware of any states that do have no statute of limitations for these types of offenses? Is this the majority of the states, minority?
I don't know the number. South Carolina and Mississippi are the laws that we are looking at here, that we're following. We had an instance that was publicized in the Augusta paper a good bit, and they were and everyone in Augusta was very supportive because the South Carolina law allowed them to go after that gentleman later.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions of the author? We have one individual signed up. You can say where you are. That'll be fine. It's David McDade, my district attorney from Douglas County. I'm sure he is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank Chairman Harbin for bringing this bill. I am David McDade, and I'm the district attorney in Douglas County, and I'm here in that capacity. I want to start by thanking Representative Chairman Harbin for this bill, in that this is not a bill that prosecutors brought forward, but it is a bill that prosecutors completely support. When we saw this bill, we sought out Chairman Harbin and asked for permission to support his bill. I mean, just putting it candidly. In my career, I have unfortunately prosecuted a tremendous number of child molestation cases, child abuse cases. In my circuit, which is Douglas County, many years ago, we prosecuted one of the more infamous cases on a large scale of sexual abuse at the Anawake Children Facility. Anawake was a privately owned psychiatric care facility that treated troubled youth, and we ultimately prosecuted the man that was in charge of that facility for horrible sexual abuse of a number of children. In investigating that case, we came across literally dozens of young people who had been in the facility many years before, had suffered horrible abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and these people were now in their, I would say, in their 20s and 30s. They had been in the youth home when they were in their young teens, and they could identify their perpetrators. They had physical and emotional scars that they still bear today. They had no hesitation in identifying their perpetrator, but the law did not enable us at that time to prosecute cases that were of a certain age. The defendants in that case all pled guilty ultimately. There was no issue as to their guilt. In my capacity as the district attorney in Douglas County, I have met with far too many victims of sexual abuse who we have encountered while we're investigating other acts of abuse, child molestation primarily. And this is the most typical horrible scenario that I encounter. I receive a report, an investigative file, telling me that a child has been molested, a young child, maybe 6, 7 years old. I ultimately arrange to meet with that child and that child's parent or parents. the perpetrator is described as a family member, an older family member in that same child's family. And when I meet with the mother of that child, far too often I'm told by that mother that she too was molested when she was a child by that same older family member. And that mother knows the perpetrator and has endured this pain and suffering for years, but chose, for all the reasons that everyone probably here understands, to not go forward and seek redress in court. But when her child was being molested by the same perpetrator, she decided, or they decided, they could not tolerate it. Many of those second-generation victims are the second-time victim, or the second series of victims for that perpetrator. There are many, many instances where if a statute of limitations allowed it, as Chairman Harbin said, guilty people who have molested, raped, sexually abused children could be prosecuted. This bill does not change all the standards that exist today on the difficulties we face in child abuse prosecutions. It doesn't give us an advantage over changing the quality of the evidence. The recovered memory syndrome is an issue we will deal with today, tomorrow, and next year on any case that we present. It doesn't give us an enhanced ability to change the nature of the crime. It simply allows us to address those cases that we can prosecute where a person has molested a child or hurt a child outside of the current statute of limitations. I would just urge your support of the bill.
One question, Mr. McDade. Representative Levitas.
Am I correct? Hasn't the federal government removed, for similar crimes, haven't they removed statute of limitations? I know you don't practice in the federal area, but
I do. I'm not able to say.
Okay.
I don't know the statute.
And there are, am I right? There are at least 7 other states, at least that I'm aware of that have removed that. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
So you got one more. Representative Bitterfield, appreciate your time to escape.
Hey, Mr. McDade, I'm just going to ask the same questions I asked earlier. First about the sodomy statute.
Certainly.
Do you think there's any constitutional issues with including that since it's been overturned? And then the other is the recovered memory syndrome issue. I'm sure you were around when that was being, I don't know how much you were at the Capitol, but it was about 8 years ago. And there was a lot of debate about that issue, and it hasn't even come up really today.
Let me take them in reverse order. The recovered memory syndrome issue will be an issue we face whether or not you pass this bill.
Sure.
We face it today. If a child is part of that process, the recovered memory process, we'll have to encounter those same concerns about whether or not that child's memory was valid or accurately described by the professionals that recovered that memory. This bill, I don't think, changes the dynamics of that debate. We'll have to deal with it whether or not it's a prosecution that's 4 years old, 5 years old, or 10 years old. It's a valid inquiry. I appreciate the question. As for the sodomy statute, the Georgia Supreme Court did issue an opinion that struck down sodomy, but it carved out areas where sodomy cases can still be prosecuted. It left intact the criminal prohibitions against certain types of sodomy. If it's private consensual conduct between adults in their home, it's unconstitutional to criminalize that conduct. If it's not private, if it's public, for instance, if a family walks into, and the biggest scenario that we encountered was interstate rest stops. If a family goes into interstate rest stop and there's acts of sodomy being performed openly in the field, that's still prosecutable under the Georgia Supreme Court decision.
But not at a Stuckey store, right? That would never happen. Sorry.
I have no comment.
Just had to add some levity.
With that in, did you have any other questions?
But I am curious, just to follow up about the recovered memory syndrome. How do you handle those cases? I mean, if you could just walk me through, how do you investigate them? I mean, I know some of these cases can be 20 years old, and it's mostly a he said, she said clearly at that point.
As a prosecutor, I have to evaluate the credibility of every witness that's going to testify. I've had a couple of cases where basically hypnosis is what's used to recover what someone has suppressed or is alleged to have suppressed. I have to just weigh all the factors that I would weigh in any other case. Certainly a recovered memory syndrome type case is a very difficult one to prosecute. If that is the sum total of the evidence, I don't think most prosecutors are going to be in a position to go forward. I think there has to be some other corroboration or at least circumstantial evidence to support it. I don't doubt for an instant that there are victims of horrible abuse that have suppressed that painful memory. Whether or not it can be developed in a prosecutable form, I can't say.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDade.
Thank you.
Well, there's no other speakers signed up to talk on the bill. What's the pleasure of this committee? Right now would be the appropriate time.
I move this committee do pass LC 284444.
Second.
You got a motion and a second. Representative Ramsey, did you have something or making a motion? Any discussion before the vote? Seeing none, all those in favor raise your right hand. Or left. Okay. All those opposed, right hand. Congratulations, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you coming down, and know you got a busy day ahead of you.
Mr. Chairman,
busy
members of the
days.
committee, thank you so much.
Thank you. Whatever you want to do. We should have got that before we let them up, didn't we? I said any discussion. Okay, before we start on House Bill 177, for today's purposes, this will be a hearing only. There are there's at least 14 people signed up to speak on this bill. I know this went through a long and vetted process in the subcommittee, so if it's just going to be repetitive, I would ask that we don't do that. But if you got something new to bring to the conversation, please do. As you know, it's a skies are blue, the sun's out, and the birds are chirping. It's 75 degrees today, so just a little hint. But and for the committee members, since this is going to be a hearing only, by all means, ask any questions you want. But if you have any amendments that you're going to want on this bill, go ahead and have them prepared for Monday. I believe Chairman Gullick said the vote will be to get this out on Monday or to kill it, one of the two. So, both is an option. So with that, Representative Ramsey, I believe you're going to be presenting the bill for Mark Williams. So if you feel free.
Obligations, so I'm pinch hitting for him today, and we've been working on this very closely together for a long time. So, and I certainly don't want to get in the way of Chairman Bearden's golf game for this afternoon. So I'm gonna be brief to get everybody their opportunity to speak as well. I think it's important to give a little background about what kind of got Representative Williams and I into working on this issue several months ago. I guess at the end of last summer. In 1 week, I picked up the newspaper one morning, and I read about a church down in Fayette County that had a brand new church was being constructed and had 8 HVAC units outside and had every single HVAC unit cannibalized for the copper. Literally that same week, Representative Williams had 2 of his rental houses, the copper stripped out of his HVAC units. And we happened to be talking on the phone that week, and he mentioned his situation, and I mentioned what I'd read about in the paper with the church back home, and we decided to start really kind of taking a look at all this. First calls we made was to each of our sheriffs, his down in Wayne County, mine in Fayette County, a suburban county and a rural county. And we asked for some stats on copper theft, because we knew that in 2007 the General Assembly had passed a law in an effort to provide some additional tools to prosecutors and put some controls in place in an attempt to deal with the problem. So we asked for some stats on how effective that law was and what was kind of the state of affairs in terms of metal theft. What we found was 2007, the year that law was passed, the number of incidents, and the stats were strikingly similar in both of our counties, a rural county and a suburban county. 2007 to 2008 in both of our counties, the number of incidents of metal theft more than doubled in 1 year, from 1 year to the next. We felt like it's kind of a starting point. That was a pretty compelling argument. And granted, we only looked at 2 counties, but I've talked to the Sheriff's Association, who strongly endorses this legislation, and they've had similar reports from sheriffs in other counties all around the state. I've heard a lot of people say that what we're doing here, we're trying to demonize the recyclers, and I want to tell you that that's not what we're trying to do. This is what this is a very, very unique crime, in that if you go and rob a bank and you steal a bunch of cash, there is an infinite number of places where that cash can wind up. When you go and steal somebody's copper out of their air conditioner, there's a finite number of places that property is ultimately going to wind up. You're not going to find a lot of places where somebody's going to pay for copper tubing. So for the most part, in most instances, where the copper is ultimately going to end up. And I don't think the recyclers in the vast majority of cases are knowingly taking that stolen property. But as Representative Hatfield said in subcommittee, unless you are fortunate enough to catch somebody in the act of stealing the copper, the starting point, just inherently because of the nature of the crime, is going to the locations in that community where the metal is going to end up. So we started in the fall working on legislation, Representative Williams and I, and I don't want anybody on the committee to think that we have not been extremely sensitive to the concerns of the recycling industry, because I'm going to mention just a couple of provisions that were really kind of the base of our original bill that because of numerous discussions we've had with representatives of the industry, we've removed. For instance, right now in Georgia state law, cities and counties are preempted from providing additional regulation on the metal recycling industry. I looked in this other southeastern states. It's the only state in the southeast that provides such a preemption from regulation. That was in our original bill, removing that preemption to give cities and counties the abilities to add some additional regulations. We took that out of our bill out of concern from the recyclers. I had a provision in the bill originally that was strongly supported by the sheriffs that would have required the transaction data. Every transaction that occurs where a metal is sold or recycled, they have to keep a kind of a series of data. It's prescribed in law. The sheriffs originally requested that like many jurisdictions have done with pawn shops, require that data to be transmitted on a weekly basis, bi-weekly basis, whatever it is, so they can have the information in-house to aid the speed of investigations. We removed that provision because of concerns from the recyclers. Our original bill had a check requirement for all transactions. The problem we're really trying to get after is copper. We've now limited the check requirement to just copper. So when little Johnny brings his bag of tin cans in for the Cub Scouts, they're not going to have to write the recyclers wouldn't have to write a check in that instance. So we've really worked hard. I hope they would agree with me that Representative Williams and I have really been working hard to address the concerns of the industry, while also striking a balance, recognizing that this is a real problem. We hear a lot of people talk down here about, a solution looking for a problem. Folks, this is a real problem. I saw there was a news report 2 nights ago that Georgia is 3rd in the country in per capita metal theft. Now, I don't know about y'all, but that's not a stat that I want Georgia to be leading the nation in. I cited a couple of our counties, the data that they provided us, that in the last year since the SB, I think it was 203, has been in place, the number of metal theft, the incident metal theft has exploded. Now, granted, that has tracked an increase in the price of copper, and the price of copper is back down now. But the price of copper could very well spike back up again next year. So this is a problem that needs to be addressed. A proper balance needs to be struck between dealing with the problem while also being sensitive to burdens we're placing on a business, on an industry. Now, I have not been around here a long time, but I can tell you this is an incredibly eclectic group of supporters on this bill, and I think it kind of shows a little bit of how unique this problem is and how widespread it is, and how many segments of our state are affected by metal theft. People endorsing this legislation have been working on this legislation with us. We have the farmers, Georgia Power, MEAG, the sheriffs, the prosecutors, the realtors, the builders and the contractors, the Georgia Chamber, the cities and the counties, the automobile dealers, the phone companies, and that's just off the, I was just listing them a minute ago. I'm probably forgetting some folks behind me and getting some dirty looks that are supporting us, but this is a really widespread coalition because this is a problem that affects so many segments of our state's economy. So with that, I'm gonna go through the provisions of the bill, and then I of course would be happy to take any questions. What we did in Section 1 is we simply require you have to show under current law you have to show a personal identification card at the point of transaction. What we have done is require that personal identification card contain the individual's name, address, and a photograph, and it be current and unexpired. So we just beefed up the definition of what personal identification card is acceptable at the point of transaction. Going to Section 2. Current law, you'll see you have to record the name and address of the person delivering the regulated metal property. I mean, you have to look at the personal identification card, but you only have to record the name and address. What we have put in as a requirement that they maintain a photocopy of that ID in the host of data that's being collected. That was requested by law enforcement and prosecutors to provide them. It's going to have a deterrent effect. The folks are going to know that their identification is on record, and B, it helps aid law enforcement when they're starting investigations. Going down to number 9, we've asked for at the point of transaction there be a detailed written description from the person that's being paid for the property of the source from which he or she obtained the regulated metal property. What we've seen incidents where an individual comes in with manhole covers from a city, stamps or light poles from a city, or copper wiring that is clearly commercial grade utility wire. This has been done in other jurisdictions, and what it does is it gives the law enforcement a kind of when a crime's been reported and you're looking at some property, you have an opportunity to kind of put the person at the point of transaction, put the person in the position of telling you where they received this property. I think it also will help the recyclers raise their tentacles when somebody comes in and is struggling to describe where they actually received the property from. And we've also asked that they take a dated and time-stamped photograph of the purchased metal property at the point of transaction. We also added a provision in C there that provides that law enforcement officers be able to inspect the data that's kept on record there during ordinary business hours. Originally, that was ordinary business hours or any other reasonable time. We took out the any other reasonable time, recognizing the concern of the recyclers with respect to they just want to provide the records when they're actually open. Section 3, this is the check requirement. This is where we limited the check requirement to just copper, so we had to define what copper property was subject to the check requirement, and simply put, it just requires a check. The check be written to the person who provides the identification, to the name of the person on the photograph, the identification card. That the check be written to that person. We've been told by the law enforcement community this is an outstanding deterrent. Criminals want to deal in cash, and criminals don't want to deal with banks, and we believe this would be this is an important piece of the legislation and really helps from a deterrent standpoint. Finally, we beefed up the penalties on the criminals. The DAs came to us and said, give us a wider range where we can charge these folks. Let's put some meat into it. So rather than 1 to 5, we've gone from 1 to 10. Plus, we've made clear that if you cause $2,000 of property damage cannibalizing an HVAC unit and you get $50 worth of copper, we want to make sure that when determining the threshold that you can prosecute under the statute, it's $500 in damage. There was a little bit of ambiguity. Could you prosecute somebody who only got $50 worth of value out of this copper? We made clear that the value of the copper of the property you've actually stolen can be combined with the amount of damage you've actually, the pecuniary damage you've caused to the property in extracting that copper. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that's the legislation. I'd be happy to yield for questions from the committee.
Are there any questions? Representative Byrd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Ramsey, you sit next to me every day during session.
I enjoy it.
You-
I relish it daily.
I think there's a vote on this.
You often hear how I share certain things about what goes on around here at the Capitol. With an economy in crisis and people losing their jobs, and our country moving away from free enterprise, which is very obvious, is adding ever more regulation to this industry going to help solve the issues that you just laid out? And are the recyclers not following the law, or are they not doing what they're supposed to be doing?
I can tell you in my county, in Fayette County, and I would hope that every county is I mean, because really what we want to do is get the bad actors, the folks that aren't following the current law. In Fayette County, last year they prosecuted a couple of recyclers that weren't complying with the law. A gentleman from back home, I think he's here today, said he thinks that's the only county that they've done that, has gone after the recyclers, and I would encourage them to do so. But when you're talking about the economy, I would urge you to take a look at the impact on our economy of every single industry that I listed that's being impacted by this problem. I think the balance that we've struck in this legislation is to ensure the burdens are not so onerous on the industry, but while also recognizing this is a very, very real problem, and we need to beef up the law. The stats bear that out. I think we have empirical evidence that our economy, our state's economy, whether it's the builders, whether it's the property owners that own a rental property, whether it's the utilities, and you're going to hear from the utilities what kind of economic damage this is causing them, whether it's the automobile dealers, they're all being dramatically impacted by this problem. So I would, when we talk about the economy, I would urge you to look across the broad spectrum of the economy. Look at the provisions in the bill. I don't believe they're onerous, and I think it strikes a proper balance between addressing a problem while also recognizing that our friends in the recycling industry, they are a legitimate business. They're good small business owners. We go to church with them. They work in our community. We're in the chamber with them, and I think this is a good balance between those competing interests.
Follow up. And I absolutely agree. There's a lot of people that are suffering because of the loss of copper wiring, whatever else is out there. I mean, this is a whole new world for me, learning about this in the last several weeks. Do you believe, though, that if all of these things that you are now requesting in this legislation from the recycler's end, if I am a criminal and I have all of this stolen stuff, and you go to a recycler and they're going to ask all of these questions, you have to fill out all these forms, do you actually think that I'm going to continue to go back to a recycler? Wouldn't it drive me underground or back to the black market?
I think criminals will always look for ways to avoid the law. That's their inherent nature.
Absolutely.
But we know for a fact that stolen material is, and again, I think in the vast majority of the cases, it's unknowingly ending up with recyclers. So when that material ends up with the recyclers and there's been a theft, I kind of described why this is unique, in that we know there's a finite number of locations that where this property is ultimately winding up. I mean, even if it goes underground, it ultimately is going to have to wind up with a recycler to be recycled. That's the value of this stolen property. There's not a black market for folks that want to buy cheap copper pipe to put in their buildings. This is ultimately ending up with the recyclers. And I think we need to look at how we can provide additional deterrence, and how, when a theft does occur and this property does end up in a recycling yard, we can give law enforcement some additional tools to deal with the problem.
One last question, because as you speak, it just flags more questions. So now, if I have something stolen, copper wiring, whatever else that they take to the recyclers, are there special sorts of marks, knowing full well where it came from? I mean, I know the other day on television they suggested you can go to, I think, to the sheriff's department now, your police departments, and get barcodes to put on your televisions. Right. Or all these people doing that sort of stuff to actually identify that it belongs to them?
I think you'll hear from some of the utilities, and they can probably speak better. I know some of the recyclers that we heard subcommittee have encouraged people to do that. And I think people are. I think that's certainly part of the puzzle. But I think the utilities and the industry, unique industries that are each affected by this, they're probably better to speak to how they can mark their metal that's being stolen. So I would encourage you to ask that question to them.
I shall.
So.
Thank you.
Representative Everson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Ramsey, thank you so much. Former sweet mate of mine.
Yes, sir.
I think he shared the same office I did for about 2 days, and then he got elevated up to the governor's floor leader.
It was a great 2 days. Though.
I know.
Yeah. Sometimes I really miss that office.
Thank you for this legislation. As everyone is aware that this is a serious problem in the state of Georgia and across this nation. My county, Gwinnett County, was a victim of this on 2 ball fields out in Gwinnett County. The players arrived for a game that day and to their surprise, attempted to turn on the lights, and there were no lights. Someone had moved in overnight and stripped all the wiring out of there to sell for money. But my question goes to, and I have further questions as the witnesses come forth and testify for or against this bill here. I understand we have to strike a balance because it's affecting everyone, but I want us to be very, very careful that we don't punish the businesses here with what we do, because I'm a little concerned here as to some of the restrictions that are being placed on businesses that are currently doing what is required by law, and we're asking them to do even more. But that still open for debate on as the process moves along. But on page 2, I want to get some clarification. Subsection 9 there, line 45. I want to make sure I'm interpreting this language correctly. It says a detailed written description from the person receiving consideration in the purchase transaction describing the source from which he or she obtained the regulated metal property together with a dated and time-stamped photograph of the purchased metal property. Am I interpreting this correctly? If I have a bulk load of metal that I'm bringing to, let's say, Renewal Recycling in East Point, and I pull up to their scale, and the bulk load is consistent of several small pieces of metal in that load. Am I to have each piece of metal in that load photographed, identified? Maybe I'm asking this question
I
prematurely.
think it's a very a good question, and in like everything we do down here, it's subject to interpretation. But my intention in that provision is if you have a load you're putting on the scale, is that you take a picture of that load that's on the scale, and you're not pulling out one piece of metal at a time. That would be my interpretation. That would be my certainly my intent in us putting that provision in the bill.
Okay, thank you.
Shirley, I'm about to answer a quick question for you. I know you're saying it's an intent, but how the bill reads, would it be exactly what Mr. Everson said? Every piece would have to be.
Well, when you bring when you engage in a transaction, you're only receiving one sum of money. You're only receiving a check or cash. So if you bring a load in that goes on the scale, they're not writing you a check for each piece of metal. So I think if you bring the load in and you're receiving consideration for that transaction, if you take a picture of all the property subject to that transaction in bulk, then I, in my opinion, that it'd be compliant. But of course, I'd be if the members of the committee have a suggestion on how to further clarify that, I'd be happy to entertain that.
Representative Everson, did I cut you off, or did you got another question?
I have a follow-up question, Mr. Chairman, because my concern is that with that bulk load, underneath there might be some stolen metal. And how will we be able to identify that? The thief could come in with some,
No, there's no question. There's not a perfect solution, and certainly there are people that could evade the law in that way. But you're also going to get, in a lot of instances, people are bringing in pieces of copper wire. It's not a bulk load, and you can get a picture of a piece of utility wire, and and that's really, the problem copper's really what's driving all this. The
Right.
copper from the HVAC, the copper from the utility line, the copper from the ball fields, their lights. And a picture of a piece of copper wire could be tremendously beneficial in ultimately prosecuting these cases.
Right, and I understand that, and I want to help you get to a resolution with this where all parties are satisfied as much as possible. And I don't know if the committee members are aware, or even those sitting in the audience are aware, that Representative Byrd touched on something that I have been following. There is indeed an underground, a black market for copper being shipped out of this country to China in bulk quantities.
We heard about that in subcommittee, yes, sir.
So we need to make sure that we are getting the perpetrators in this legislation and not punishing the honest business people that are out there trying to make an honest living.
I have
further
agree
questions.
with you more.
I have further questions as the testimonies proceed.
Okay. Representative Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm concerned a little bit on line 59, dealing that recyclers shall pay by check.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at a Federal Reserve accounting unit dollar here that says this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private.
Mm-hmm.
But so can we circumvent the federal legal tender law?
There is no constitutional prohibition that I know of limiting how a private transaction can be paid for. I mean, there are instances where you're required to pay by money order, required to pay by check. I know of no case or any prohibition in the Constitution that would preclude prescribing how a transaction is to be paid for.
Do you know of any case where the federal government has permitted a state law that prohibits the use of legal tender, of what they deem to be legal tender?
I know of no case. I know no case where it has been a limitation on how a transaction is paid for has been prohibited either.
But now, you had mentioned, you must pay by money order or whatever. If there's is there any state law in our state mandating payment by money order?
No, there is not. But
that would be your illustration is of a business wanting to only accept a money order. It's not state law mandating use of a money order. Is that correct?
That's correct. But again, if the gentleman can show me, and we've looked for it a little bit. I've actually done a little case law research on this. If the gentleman can show me any constitutional prohibition, state or federal, or any case law out there that would prescribe a state from doing this in the interest of serving public safety, I would love to see it.
Yeah, I'm just interested in whether we can, if there's something that allows us as a state to nullify a federal legal tender act. Or are you saying there's no case law enforcing the federal legal tender law?
Not that I'm aware of. Well, certainly not where it's been challenged. Where it's been challenged in a instance such as this, a criminal code instance such as this. But I'd be happy to. I've done a little bit of LexisNexis research. I'd be happy to do a little more over the weekend for you.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Representative Byrd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How many recyclers do we have here in Georgia?
I don't. There's a lot of them here. I bet they could answer that question for you. So I don't know.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Good round one. I'll go ahead and get to some of the speakers right now. Joe Mulholland, District Attorney, if you want to come on up.
Good morning. My name is Joe Mulholland. I recognize a lot of you from the sentence review panel that I was on several years ago. And I will try to be brief, Mr. Chairman, but please understand I woke up at 4:15 this morning to come up to testify on this bill. I usually leave legislative matters to David McDade in his capable hands, but this issue to me affects my circuit probably more so than some of the bills, for instance, the life without parole bill that Preston and everybody else is doing. This bill has more impact on what I do on a daily basis than pretty much any legislation right now going on. And the reason for that is because I have the 5 counties, about 100,000 people in my circuit, and the area is basically the southwest part of our state, directly across from Florida. And we have had a huge problem with copper wire thefts, mainly with our farmers. What they do is they have pivots out there, and they can hook up their truck and within 2 minutes do damage, thousands of dollars of damage to that pivot, and not only ruin the pivot but the crops. And it's gotten to be such a problem that I felt like we needed to do something. I had actually contacted both Senator Bullock and my 2 reps, Maddox and Powell, and they were going to put something in the hopper, but then I was lucky enough and fortunate enough to get with Matt and Representative Williams, and they have been gracious enough to allow me some input on this bill. I think this committee, just in my view, is looking at this as though this is penalizing or somehow putting an onerous burden onto the scrap metal companies. What we're talking about is a photo ID and a picture of the metal. Originally, I had hoped that we'd have fingerprints in there, and I understand that that has been removed from the bill. All of that stuff that is being required is not to go after the scrap metal companies, it's to prosecute the individuals that are bringing the material there. I told this to the Senate Regulation Committee when I testified up there on Senator Unterman's bill that's similar to this. My mother loves CSI. I hate that show. I absolutely hate that show. And the reason I hate it is because juries now have unfair expectations of what to expect from prosecutors when they're presenting their evidence. We have to have tangible evidence. If I go in there and I say, John Smith traded this copper, they want to see that picture of that copper. If they say that John Smith put that copper in there, they want to see a picture, ID of John Smith, so they can say, yeah, that's him, rather than the scrap metal dealer saying that's the guy that brought me the copper. The law in Florida, and where I'm at, there is a huge, I guess it's Newell now, it used to be Schnitzer, huge plant in Bainbridge, which is my hometown. And the reason it's there is because Floridians are taking the metal and bringing it up to Georgia because our law is so lax on scrap metal dealers. Down in Florida, in order to give metal, you have to have a fingerprint, you have to have a picture of the material, you have to have a picture of the person, you have to have a picture of the vehicle and the driver's number or driver's license plate of that vehicle. And that has to be all compiled in a database, and if you don't have a database for it, you have to return it over to the local sheriff's entity. So people are actually crossing the border to give these materials, and I think that answers some of your question about a black market. There actually is one. It's Floridians coming into Georgia because we don't have a law on it. The law that we have that Senator Hart passed several years ago basically says that they cannot knowingly take illegal materials. Well, folks, that's almost impossible to prove unless the only example I know, and I know a district attorney who did a grand jury investigation where they literally dressed somebody up in a utility uniform, got a huge thing of wire, and it said EMC on the front. I can't remember the name of the EMC. Took it to the scrap metal place, and the guy said, I can't take that. But if you take it off the copper tube, if you take the tubing off that spool and come back, I can take it. Now, we have a problem. That is a serious problem. And I'm not saying that all these companies are doing that, but it's enough that even one is. And if we need some regulations that are onerous, that's one thing. But all we're asking for is a picture and a driver's license. I mean, that's all we're really asking for. As far as the bill itself, personally, I think this is the best bill that's out there right now. Representative Ramsey has been gracious enough to allow me to put some input into this thing, and I think he's done a great job with this bill. I think it's the most comprehensive, and I also think it's the least intrusive to the companies themselves of all the bills both in the Senate and the House. There has to be some kind of bite to the bill so that we can prosecute those individuals that aren't following the law. And I understand we don't want to be so burdensome to these companies that they don't become profitable, but understand My farmers have been hit. My school that we've just built, several $1 million school in Bainbridge, it's going to be a huge school. They stole all the copper. And luckily we were able to recover it soon enough before they actually traded it in. The provisions in Section 4 to me are the best part, and I don't know how in the world any of the metal recyclers could possibly be opposed to that part. That is the part that basically says that it will be a felony, a 1 to 10 felony, just like any other theft by taking. And it makes the damage looking at being the aggregate cost. What this basically means, and I know that Representative Ramsey touched on it, but other than besides it being a felony now, also for the purposes of restitution. You know, if they go out there and they damage a pivot and they do $5,000 of damage to that pivot and they also ruin the peanut field, it's still a misdemeanor. And misdemeanors you can only sentence someone for 12 months. Well, there's no way that that farmer is going to get restitution in 12 months for that amount of money. They just won't be able to pay it back legitimately. So making it a felony so we can get the restitution costs and get something back to these farmers that are hurt, or the businesses or the house rental owners, that's why that provision is so good. And it has nothing to do with the metal recyclers. That strictly does makes it a felony for the people that are actually the ones that remove the copper. One last point I would make, you don't have to go outside your own body to find people that have been hurt, both Democrats and Republicans. I know that Representative Williams has been hit by this. I know a good friend of mine, Rashad Taylor, has been hit by this. Everybody is impacted on this, and you can look in your own body and see that. I think this bill is the least burdensome and the most comprehensive, and you can help us with this bill. And I know y'all make sausage up here, and that's why we got the fingerprint thing out there, and I don't want to know how it gets made. But this bill, I really think that Representative Ramsey and Representative Williams have been extremely reasonable in compromising with the companies on this compared to where it started.
You do have one question,
Yes, sir.
Representative Vettis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I think one thing that regardless of whether you're for or against this bill, we can all agree on is that it's a problem and we need to fix it. I guess my concern, and I think Representative Byrd and Representative Everson have touched on this too, is for the sake of addressing one problem, we're creating another problem. And while there are certainly some bad operators out there, we're putting, in my opinion, somewhat of a burden, as it's currently drafted anyway, on very legitimate operators who would be glad to cooperate with anybody to make sure that bad guys are not out there for two reasons. One, most businesses are good people trying to make a living. And number two, it doesn't help their business to have the reputation that they're somehow a fence or a pawn for metal theft. And I'm familiar with some of these. I don't know Newell, to be honest with you. I might know who they are. I've never been out to their plant, but I'm familiar with some of the other operators. And there's folks who aren't just scrap yards. There are, for example, some automobile salvage yards who go out there and do the same or similar things in terms of having cars brought to them, and there may be a catalytic converter on that. But again, 99% of those are legitimate, and they would be glad and hope to eliminate those 1%. But I'm also familiar with, and again, I think this goes to what Representative Byrd was saying, that in an economy like this, you're going to have metal theft whether this passes or doesn't pass, and that's not going to continue. And my understanding, and I've only looked at a little bit of this when I became aware of it, is that there are other states out there that have passed similar, even more stringent bills, but have actually experienced an increase in copper thefts and metal thefts. And so if what we need to do here, or try to do, is tailor the solution to the problem. And I'm somewhat concerned that we may be putting burdens on businesses without having the necessary resulting and intended effect of reducing copper and metal theft. And I wonder if you can comment on those other jurisdictions that have passed laws where there's actually been an increase in thefts.
Well, I think the increase can also be attributed to the economy going sour, and also, of course, the price. I mean, I don't think you can say, well, they passed these bills 3 years ago, now they have an increase. Well, so the copper prices went up, and also the economy went to the chute. So, I mean, you can't just say that it's went down, because a lot's changed since the bills were enacted in Florida back when we basically did ours with Senator Harp. They did theirs, and like I said, they require a fingerprint, a ton of photos. And I can just tell you, from me and my perspective, I'm on the front lines. I see this stuff. I live right down on the Florida line, it is well known that these folks are coming across from Florida because they don't want to give a fingerprint to a company down in Florida when they can come across Georgia and not give anything. I mean, that's just, I mean, if you're a criminal, how much sense does it make to be in Florida when you have to require to give a fingerprint and take photos, all this, if you can literally go 20 minutes and you don't have to do anything?
Do you think a bill with a Florida gate or license plate prohibited from entering into Georgia might address this and be easier on businesses? Because I could support that kind of legislation.
We've tried to prohibit that myself in Florida State. It's closer where I'm at. They're all over the place. But, yes, I mean, but seriously, it's become a huge problem. It really is. And I think that this bill, all we're asking for is a photo of the material and a copy of the driver's license. I mean, you can go pawn a gun a heck of a lot easier than you can do this stuff, and it shouldn't be.
And and I haven't seen the most recent iteration. Is there still a limit on the check amount that's in the bill that can be given? There was at one point, I think, either none or has that been removed? I don't know if that's still in there.
Representative Ramsey.
What we did was the original version of the bill required a check in every single metal transaction. What we have done in the last couple versions is restrict it just to the copper transaction. So in the universe of metal transactions, the check requirement only applies to copper. And as the bill is currently drafted, there is no threshold. We heard instance after instance of copper being sold for $10, $15, little wires of copper. I think you're going to hear from some of the EMC folks about that. So we limited the universe that the check requirement applies to, but as currently drafted, there's no dollar threshold.
Okay, and I guess this is a question for someone on the front lines. If there was, a dollar limit that was higher than zero, $100, $200, because what I have heard from some of the folks in the industry is, we're going to have cash for this, and they have to go cut a check for $10 on that. Would it significantly interfere with what you're trying to stop if there was a $100, $200 threshold for checks and anything above that?
Well, my main thing, Representative Levitas, is the photos. That the checks is important in the sense that if someone writes a check to John Smith, if they don't have a bank account and they go cash that check, we're gonna get their fingerprint there. And I think that was a good compromise that Representative Ramsey made on this. The amounts are not so important to me as the photos and the copy of the driver's license, because I cannot prosecute a case based on the hearsay testimony of a scrap dealer without a picture ID. I'm sorry, I just can't, and therefore it's a problem. It really is a serious problem, and I don't, like I said, I don't think it's too much to ask. I think saying I've heard that there was a pamphlet going out that maybe they should the people that have this copper should spray paint it black, and therefore it's more marked. And I think you mentioned that. What can we do to mark the copper? I mean, I'd love to see Representative Taylor crawling under his rental house trying to spray paint all his copper wire under there. I mean, that's almost like saying to the child, be more cognizant of sexual predators. The child's not the problem. I mean, I want to see my farmers out here on 200 peanut acres and the strip of a copper that goes down that whole pivot, spray painting that thing for 200 acres. I mean, that's ridiculous. These people are being stolen from, and yet they're the ones that are being made out to be the perpetrator. They have to do this, and that's crazy to me. I mean, I guess I just think that's crazy. And plus, okay, now it's all painted black. Okay. I mean, how does that prove anything? That's black copper. I mean, it's okay.
Well, and I think I could spray paint my own copper and decide I want to recycle it.
That's what I'm saying.
So, I'm with you on that. Again, but I think the point you raised is exactly what I'm trying to get at is we don't want to punish the person who's legitimate owner getting stolen from, and I also want to be mindful that we're not putting undue burdens on the honest businessman either. So that's why I'm trying to feel around for that. And I have not put in the hours that Representative Ramsey and Representative Williams and obviously you have put in on this. And for better or for worse, the way this committee process works is once it's been vetted at subcommittee, it comes to us, and so we have to rely both on the knowledge and the discussions that y'all have been engaged in. But some of those concerns are, still there for us to try and vet here. So that's why we're trying to find that compromise. I shouldn't speak for Representative Everson and Byrd, but that's certainly my take on it.
And I agree with you. I just personally don't think it's too burdensome to have a copy machine where you can put an ID on there and to take a photo. I mean, digital cameras right now cost $200, and you can put them all on a disc. And I mean, to me, that's not burdensome. Compared to what the damage that's being done to the farmers, the real estate agents, everyone else that's getting hurt by these crimes.
And do you have any idea how your farmer folks might feel about having to have their picture taken and stored somewhere if they want to go recycle their own copper? And I'm asking that. That's not a
Oh, I understand.
trick question. I'm asking you really. How do they feel about that?
I don't think they'd have any problem with that. I mean, they're taking copper and they're using the photo IDs to prosecute people. It's not a fingerprint. I mean, that's the least intrusive thing in the world. You go to a bank and you want to cash a check, you got to give a fingerprint. I mean, I just think that's holding a photo to get copper metal. I absolutely don't think there's anything wrong with that.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your indulgence.
For you always. Representative Byrd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kind of curious, you're talking about taking a picture of anything that goes to a recycler. If all copper wiring looks the same, which I'm not sure that it does, and you're looking at a picture, how do you know that it was stolen from some place where an EMC is, or from a home builder's a place, or someone's home? How are we going to determine that it was stolen at all?
Right. That's a great question. I think the way this bill works, and this is why it's so important to have that tangible evidence, it's any crime is within 48 hours. After that 48 hours, the chances of actually prosecuting the crime it exponentially goes down. It's just very much difficult. If it's a kidnapping case, if you're able to find the person within 48 hours, you're going to get them a whole heck of a lot more if you can get that first 48 hours. It's crucial. So let's use your example. Not all copper does look the same. The way it looks out on a pivot versus how it looks on a spool wire for an EMC, I mean, it just looks different. Let's say that one of the farmers has their pivot, copper wire stolen off their peanut field. They know that that wire, based on how long the pivot is going to be 400 feet. So they're looking for 400 feet of copper. If somebody, John Smith, takes to the local recycling company and gets a 400-foot piece of copper and does it, and I've got a picture of that, I've got a pretty good case. Certainly it's not going to work if that's not discovered that the pivot's damaged for 2 weeks, and it won't be. It's not going to work in every case. But having that photo is going to be the difference between getting a prosecution on that case and holding somebody responsible, not the scrap metal people. These laws are not going after them and trying to be personal. It's trying to make it so that I can get the folks that are doing this and make it a deterrent and get the farmer restitution for his damage. And that's how I would. That's why I think the photo is so important as far as the prosecution of the case.
Follow up. So all these people that are sitting in this room, they're going to be okay with marking all of their stuff now. Their copper wiring, farm equipment, all that sort of stuff. So then when we do take the picture, we can identify where it belongs.
No. What I'm saying is
I'm asking.
No, ma'am. Representative Byrd, what I'm saying is if you know that a pivot has had the wire taken off and it's a 500-foot pivot, you're going to be looking for 500 foot of copper. If you've got a spool of wire from an EMC that's taken, they can measure how much that is. They don't have to mark it. I'm just saying in feet what we're looking for. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. So if a criminal wants to cut it in that long 400 feet and cut it into 3 pieces and you take it to various other, one piece here, one piece over there, how are we going to know?
I probably won't. And that's what
Case
I said.
in point. Thank you. Also, and last question, you made a comment about we have become the dumping grounds for everyone's stolen stuff from Florida.
Right.
Is there any proof that we have become the dumping ground? Has it been documented somewhere that Georgia has become the dumping ground for this sort of stuff?
I'm sure that I can get you some documentation if you want. I did not know you wanted. I would have gone to my sheriff's office and got how many incident reports we have. I know we've had 2 in the last month that we kind of come off, and then we found out that it was stolen in there. The photo, like you said, though, you're right. It's not going to be perfect every time, but it's certainly better than no photo. I mean, and that's where we're at now.
And one last question, please. You're talking about more pictures, cameras, all this other additional stuff on the recyclers' end of it, and you want them to pay for all of this?
A copy machine and a photo and a camera, yes, ma'am.
And what happens, do they need, if something breaks down, then what do they do?
If the copy machine breaks down?
That's correct. Should they have a second one to do all the things that this bill wants them to do now?
Well, according to this bill, and understand this too, these are regulations, and right now it's a misdemeanor if they're punishable if they don't follow these regulations. I don't know any DAs, but I certainly, if it was broken, they're trying. I'm not going to go after them. I mean, that's silly. I mean, no, I don't know any DAs in this state that would do something like that. We're like I said, we're trying to get this stuff so that we can prosecute the people. If they say my camera's broke or my copper's broke, I'm not going to prosecute them. I'm not concerned about the recyclers. I'm concerned about the methamphetamine addicts that are stealing all this stuff, and that's why I need some kind of tangible evidence. No, I'm not going to prosecute them. I don't know anybody that would. I really don't. David, as hard as he is, it's really not that hard.
Yeah, yes.
Thank you.
Representative Ramsey, you want to shed something on
I
this?
just to the point about the difference in how copper looks. If there is all the industries can speak to this when they speak, but if a piece of utility line is stolen, the copper in a utility line looks very different than if there's a catalytic converter stolen, or if there's a coil stolen out of somebody's HVAC unit. So every piece of copper doesn't look the same. So to that point, I think the industry folks can better speak to the different kind of coppers used in their industries. So just I think I would urge you to ask that question as they take to the stand.
Representative Everson.
I'll wait.
Good. Representative Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You said how important the photograph is. Would you have a better chance of prosecution if there was a fingerprint or maybe even a retina scan?
Absolutely. In today's day and age, and in fact, I think in the original bill there was fingerprint was included. Absolutely. I mean, people want DNA evidence. Like I said, that CSI show, they want to see DNA. They want to see a fingerprint. They don't want to just see a photo. Absolutely.
Should we put in here just swab the mouth and save that?
I think that you probably would go. I think that we got to get a search warrant to do that. So no, I mean, there's search warrants required for that kind of stuff.
No, well, there's no search warrant for the photograph.
No, sir. I mean, but I can take your photo on the street. I mean, I'd be invading your privacy if I actually stuck a thing in your mouth.
But if the law requires that to do this transaction, just like the law requires you to circumvent federal legal tender law, how would that be any different?
Because I need a search warrant to stick in your mouth.
You would, but the
Right.
the recycler wouldn't to stick in the seller's mouth.
Well, the fingerprints.
So if we put that in here, would that help you?
Of course it would help, but I think that's not being reasonable. I mean, in Florida, apparently it's reasonable to put require a fingerprint. They've said that is reasonable. So I guess it's just what your standards are.
Would it going back to the identification of the metal? Would it be feasible to put some type of RFID chip every so many inches or feet in the metal that could identify the metal?
Would that be feasible?
Yeah.
It'd be about as feasible as requiring a buccal swab, and the answer is no. But I think there's a dramatic difference between a buccal swab and a fingerprint, or even a photo. There's a distinct difference.
Thank you.
Don't see any other questions. I appreciate your time very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you, Tim.
Next one I have Bill Verner and Bentley Carter on the same line. Can y'all come up together and do this? Thank you, sir. I know you got a time limit also, I believe. Not on speaking, but I think you got to be somewhere is what I meant to say.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I do apologize, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, that I do have to leave after our testimony today, but Mr. Carter here and Brandon Reese from Georgia EMC and the EMCs will be here should there be any further questions from our interest. I'm Bill Verner, Vice President of Government Relations with Georgia EMC, the statewide trade association for all the EMCs in the state, Georgia Transmission Corporation and Oglethorpe Power. As most of you know, we provide electric service through our nonprofit consumer-owned cooperative utilities to almost 3/4 of the state's land area. We're in all but 2 counties in our state and serve roughly half of the population. There has been a fair amount of discussion this morning about the marking facilities, and that is certainly another measure among many measures, countermeasures that we are incurring within the EMCs and the utility community, not just in Georgia but nationally. But a number of the marking technology that is evolving that can actually be uniquely identified with microdots is technologically feasible, extremely costly, and may well be implemented in certain high-risk areas, but it is the existing infrastructure that is being damaged. And just to give you an idea, so for new infrastructure, new installations, some of the new technology may well apply, but for existing infrastructure, since we are a rural utility covering such a vast amount of land area, we only average about 10 customers per mile of line in the state. We have 178,000 miles of distribution line, 178,000 miles. Our counterparts with Georgia Power and with the electric cities, since they serve a much more densely populated area in general in the state, being incorporated areas, we probably have twice the distribution system in the state in terms of its scope that the electric cities and Georgia Power have. So our experience is quite unique from that respect because we serve these sparsely populated areas where there's not as much of a neighborhood watch program to catch these criminals that are out in rural areas. In fact, I believe members of the committee have received an FBI report from December of 2008 that cites the national security threat from copper theft nationally, not just in Georgia, but nationally. The national security threat notice that came out from the FBI cites real-world instances of residents in Mississippi failing to get early warning from a tornado siren in their community because the copper had been stolen out of the tornado warning siren. The air traffic control in Ohio was in jeopardy of losing its ability to function as it should due to an incident of copper theft from a utility substation there. The public safety issue and our employee safety issue is what we are here very passionately about today. We are not seeking your assistance with legislation thinking that it alone will solve this problem. This problem has existed for a number of years, and in fact, we've been working on it, particularly in the legislative arena, for over 3 years. This legislative body approved legislation that we worked very closely with the scrap dealer industry in 2007 to increase the criminal aspects so that in most cases with copper theft, when somebody's coming in and breaking into one of Bentley's substations and getting $25 worth of scrap copper, no matter if they did $10,000 of damage to the substation and other property, they could still only be charged with a misdemeanor offense. By incorporating the damage to the utility property in addition to the replacement cost of the material and the value of the material stolen, almost every incidence of copper theft from an electric utility is now a felony conviction. There have been some successes since that law went into effect July 1 of 2007. However, in 2008 versus 2007, the number of incidents for all utilities in the state went from 299, as best we can tell, to over 800. That's after the new criminal provisions went into effect. Damage to equipment, our cost to damage to property, almost $500,000 in 2007, over $1 million in 2008. The cost to our consumers' property, the cost to reliability, the cost to electric service, and all that is associated with the public safety that is involved in critical infrastructure are very important, but there's nothing more important than the safety of our employees that would walk into an electric substation, an energized substation, assuming that it is properly grounded, but only to find that criminals have cut in the backside of the substation, ripped out the copper grounds, and that substation is a life-threatening hazard. Ladies and gentlemen, it's only a matter of time before we have an employee electrocuted, perhaps fatally, whether it's in a substation or out among our facilities. Now, we're not saying that this legislation is going to be the solution. We are taking the responsibility of working with law enforcement, working with community leaders, working with scrap dealers to raise awareness, draw attention to the new law that was passed 2 years ago, but also we're incurring additional costs for countermeasures. The estimated dollars spent nationwide by electric utilities last year alone, additional dollars spent just to address security issues, over $26 million. The copper theft damage to property nationally in the last year alone was over $60 million. So the dollar values are very important, but the threat to our employee safety and to public safety is vital. Bentley Carter here is responsible for safety and loss control for Satilla EMC, that has one of the most rural, largest geographies to serve down in southeast Georgia. He's responsible for safety for his employees and for loss control. The number of incidents that he has experienced is a perfect example of the magnitude of this problem. So Bentley, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for hearing me today. I had the opportunity to talk to the subcommittee the other day, and it's pretty lengthy, and I apologize for that now, but I'm passionate about this. And the committee members that several of you got to look at these pictures. I would like to pass these around if anybody has any questions. I personally took every one of those pictures. Some of those are not going to mean a whole lot to you. If you have questions, I can explain them. I took them all except the last one. Again, Satilla EMC is located in southeast Georgia. Our corporate office is in Alma, which is incorporated around 8 rural counties that we serve: Ware, Bacon, Pierce, Coffee, Wayne, Appin, Jeff Davis, Atkinson. So that gives you the area of where we're at. In 2006, we've always had a little, somewhat of copper theft along our power lines, but in 2006 it began to escalate, and we started tracking as best as we could, and when we would find, getting reports turned in. In 2007, it almost doubled. In 2008, it over doubled again, with the amount of 218,678 feet of main power line copper cut down in 156 different locations on our system. And to me, what that does, not thinking about the economics of that our members have to pay for the replacement cost, which we track through our accounting, is about 90 cents a foot to replace that, is the public hazard. Now, I'm deeply concerned with what my EMC employees have to face in regards to the copper theft that we're having on our system. But our EMC employees, we drill and train and talk and discuss weekly, daily in many cases in our training programs what we're supposed to do. And if they're doing what they're supposed to do, you know, we can hope that we can prevent, even though that the chance for them to be injured is still great out there. But one of the things that I'm seeing, and as you can see in these pictures, we're having the general public hazards that are being created. They're cutting down copper wires that are crossing over county rural roads, highways in southeast rural Georgia. And to give you a little background, when you string miles and miles of wire, it's tied in on individual poles with, it's just got wire wrapped around it to hold it on insulators. And when you cut it down on one side and leave tension on the other side, it can very easily slip through that tie that's supposed to be holding it. And that's allowing it to drop down. In cases we've found, 10, 12, 15 feet over the highways in rural Georgia, and there's possibilities it can continue to drop. And when it gets out on our system, we don't, just because they cut it down, we don't know it. It can be out there days or even weeks before some of our people ride up on it and find it to report it, or a member of the general public sees it and calls us about it. In the substation theft, there's some pictures there. Those are oil field regulators that the copper wire was stolen off of. And an oil field piece of equipment, when you steal the copper grounds off, and I hesitate to talk a lot about this because I'm not an engineer and I can't explain how all that works, but I know that when you steal the copper grounds off of a piece of oil field equipment, that tank that's holding that piece of equipment, the metal tank itself has the potential to become energized. In those pictures, what you see there is 14,000 volts of electricity in those regulators trying to go to ground, trying to get back to ground, but there is no ground because it's been stolen. The pictures of the new copper and the equipment the materials that you've seen in those pictures was taken in a salvage yard. It's brand new stuff. The old picture coils that are in those pictures was taken in a salvage yard. There's really not a use for that specific copper that we've had stolen, that 218,000 feet. It's unique to an electrical utility. One case I'll mention when we're talking about the cash stuff, zero cash or amount of cash, we got a call, and this guy was stealing pole grounds off of our poles. And so I called, I had my dispatcher to call 911, and I went to the location, and this guy was there. And I'm telling you, every utility, I would dare to say, and I know we do, but every utility has scrap, and I know they sell to salvage dealers. Salvage dealers are not our enemies. We've been doing business with the same salvage dealer. This month, I've been at Satilla for 30 years, been doing safety since '96. We've used the same salvage dealer before I was hired. The same guy's been coming and picking up our stuff, and we have a wonderful relationship with him. He's from Toccoa, Georgia, but this guy was caught stripping pole grounds off as high as he could reach, getting less than a pound of copper off as high as he could reach, driving a bicycle, had it in a backpack. And this guy was an addict, okay? And he was caught. He had about 10 pounds of little copper pieces of pole ground cut up in his bag. And they carried him to jail, and they got me at the grand jury, and I was asked, well, you just got this guy for 30, at that time copper was about $3. You got this guy for about $30 of copper. And I said, no ma'am. I said, we've got 120 some odd poles around the area where he says he lives, and about 200 and something poles on the Georgia power system in that same general area. And he had sold to the recycler in that area 16 times that same month. So we were trying to put a case together there, and this guy finally, he was on probation, and I failed to mention this. I told you about it later because I didn't want you to think I was trying to be deceptive, but this guy was on probation, and he actually pled to stealing the grounds, and he ended up getting about 4 years with a joint deal, however the law works, on his time with stealing copper and the pleading and the probation he was on. Make a long story short, if he couldn't have gotten cash, $10 or $15, $20, $30 at the clip when he went out there every day to get a drink or to get a fix, he could have went and robbed a convenience store or a bank or whatever. But my thing is, would he have done that? Would he be in jail? I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying, we're all looking for something to help us. The utilities, everybody in this room, and I'm just pleading to you today that my members' safety, my members' expense, I'm just asking you to help us with a law that, from what we put in place the last time it was revised today, that's gonna help us. I don't have all the answers, and I know just because we adopt whatever's on this bill today is not going to fix the whole problem. I understand that, but we've got to do something to help the situation. And you guys have been challenged with that task when you sit to make these decisions, and I've heard them say I yield well. Okay, I don't know whether y'all know I'm not professional, but I'm begging for your help. You know, does that mean I don't have to answer questions?
No. The last comment got you a question there, Representative Everson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do empathize with your position. I know where you are. As far as the farmers, I'm a farmer myself, grew up on a farm in South Georgia, still have the farm down there. Matter of fact, it's adjacent to Jeffrey Harvey over there, who represents Georgia Farm Bureau. I remember when Jeffrey was born, he and I used to play together. And I'm very sympathetic to what's happening with the pivot system down there. My father being a farmer, I know how expensive they are. $500,000 a clip, and you take that copper out of there, it's very detrimental to that farmer for the crops as well. And I, as I stated, I'm very concerned about this, and I think we're on the right track, and I don't want anyone to be misled in here that we don't want to do what is right here. We do, but we have to find that common ground, and I'm pretty confident that we will find that common ground, and we're going to pass some legislation that's going to help all the parties involved. It's just getting to that process is part of this vetting process that we go through here in the subcommittee or the main committee. The current laws that are currently on the book, your sheriff is currently enforcing those in your county where you are.
You know, and that's
To the best he can.
That's a good point. I think there's a lot of things that are in current law that they don't feel like they can prosecute. They need some assistance with it. One of the things that I see, and I've got all the investigators in the counties we serve in my link, and I have become personal friends with all of them. I've spent so much time with them the last few years. But one of the things pretty consistently where we're at is that we're right or wrong, according to how they interpret the law. I've talked to District Attorney Rick Curry about this. I believe they should be writing wire, tubing, pipe, castings, extrusions, or whatever on receipts. My guys go in and they pull receipts. Those 16, if it had been pushed, it was #1 copper. We couldn't prove really and truly on the receipts that the guy had. We couldn't prove what he sold, and that's one reason I want to bring that up. Is this needs to be specified that if they're buying wire, it needs to be wire. If they're buying tubing or pipe or whatever, you know, it needs to be specified where a law person can look at that receipt and know that this guy bought this material or sold this material, whichever way you want to say that. And I think that's one thing they were trying to get at too with the picture. And in response, and I know I'm going on and I probably shouldn't, but in response to the tractor trailer loads of materials, there again, I'm talking from where I'm at. I've never been to a big salvage yard. What I'm seeing is stuff coming in the backs of cars, 500 pound of that green wire you see rolled up in there, caught in the back of a car. Automatically, I would have to question, why have you got that wire? It just, to me, that makes no logic for a person to pull up in an automobile in the trunk of a car and have 500 feet of utility grade copper, you know. And the statement of origin, to me, is going to be a big help in that. And you say, well, anybody can lie, and I understand that. If the thief steals it, he's probably going to be willing to lie about it. But at least it gives that investigator a tool that he can go and say, okay, this is the statement you made. He goes and checks that out. And I know anything can happen. I'm not saying this is going to be anything specific, but then if he goes and talks to an individual that says where he got it or whatever, and they say, no, that's not, then he can go back to the person and say, okay, well, you've lied to an officer. You know, there's another issue. So I hope I answered your question.
You did. Thank you so much, and you were correct. You did deal. Thank you.
Representative Byrd.
Thank you very much. I'm looking at pictures right here.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Am I to assume that this is like a substation?
That is a substation.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And it's behind wire.
It is behind fence, barbed wire at the top, signage, lock gates, the whole 9 yards.
Okay. Now, certainly we would never want anything to happen to your workers or anyone else for that matter. Are these types of places have surveillance and cameras if you're going to start?
Yes. In fact, not every substation does. Again, with Georgia Transmission Company alone that provides the transmission services to the distribution cooperatives in the state, they have over 600 substations throughout the state. In high-risk areas where we have been hit repeatedly, and there are a number of those instances, the surveillance cameras are definitely being put into place and are having some effect. The challenge here is, and I'll use another parallel, that where you where you tighten down on your countermeasures. And a countermeasure can be a very aggressive scrap dealer that's working with law enforcement in the community and others to do over and above what the current law requires. Those countermeasures, you put your finger in the hole here and it sprays out somewhere else. The relatively weak laws in our state with respect to what is required for the seller, not for the scrap dealer, for the seller to provide, is creating this market in Georgia that has made us the dumping ground, that has made the number of incidences continue to rise no matter what the criminal provisions are. If I've not been to a small scrap yard. I've been to a big one. I've been to Chip Copland's Macon Iron, who has been just a real stalwart in helping to address the area, and they've got an incredible story in Macon where we've partnered with them to reduce the number of incidents dramatically. A great case study. Their problem is working because of the aggressive effort, but it's not universal. It's not widespread in the state. Chip told me, I was down touring his facility last fall, and he already scans the driver's license voluntarily. He already videotapes the sales transaction point voluntarily. He already writes checks for every transaction because he don't want to keep cash on hand. He's worried about being ahead himself. It makes me wonder, in large part, why we're even having this debate today. That he said, as a member of the ISRI Executive Committee, that he'd probably get in trouble with his members by actually saying he could live with all that because there are a lot of folks that might not like that. But he's going above and beyond. They're having results in Macon. This legislation really doesn't require Chip to do anything different that I'm aware of in their business practice.
And a follow-up question, always going back to the pictures. Okay, so now, again, I'm ignorant to this and just learning in the last couple of weeks this issue. All right, so if I have this stuff in my buckets and I take it to a metal scrap person, a legitimate one, will they know whether I have this is legitimate stuff or if it's been stolen?
All I can answer that to is opinion. And I've been in the business for 30 years, and that salvage dealer where that was purchased has been in business a good while too. And it's my opinion, okay, and I stress that because I'm questioning somebody else's knowledge and integrity. And
I do the same.
I'm trying to do better than that, but it's awful hard sometimes. That was sold and purchased in a place in our area, which is in all respects a relatively small salvage yard, even though it's bigger than those setting up on the sides of the roads that you see every once in a while saying, I buy scrap. My opinion is he knew, and the reason I've got that picture, is that he called and I went and took that picture. Now, has there been anything done with that? There hadn't.
And I'd venture to say too that without a picture of the, without the requirement for a picture, number one. Number two, if the person if it's a cash transaction, there's no way to track, who it was sold to. If I'm the scrap dealer, I would love to see more assurances that the product that I'm purchasing and who I'm buying it from is less likely to be criminal than more likely. I think it's an extra assurance for the scrap dealers.
This particular yard as well does the driver's license. They know this individual, took the photo ID. I'm talking again on, I'm not sure what they have done in this instance right here. I believe this guy told them that I found it. And where were they at then? So.
Which is my point, so I'm still trying to figure out, even if we take pictures, if that's what we at the end require recyclers to start taking pictures of everything that is brought into their yards, are they going to know whether this has been stolen or someone said, we don't have any use for it, you can have it. And so that's what I'm trying to find out. All right, and final question. You mentioned the rise of from some number to 800 number.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you have any idea how many transactions a scrap metal person does on a daily basis?
I know how many Chip Copeland at Macon Iron does on a daily basis.
And
It's a very large number. I mean, it can range, but several hundred to 1,000.
so if we don't, which no one's answered my question of how many scrap metal licensed legit people are here in the state of Georgia, and let's just take a figure 100 of them, and if they do thousands of transactions every day, is 800 like major?
I can, 800 incidents, yes ma'am. 800 incidents for us is quite major. You know, that's more than, what is that, 3 in every county in the state. That's a opportunity to knock out a neighborhood for 5,000 homes at a substation. And one of those incidents could take a life. So any one of those incidents, yes ma'am, is very, very serious. They're all major to us. Additionally, I would say that I don't know how many scrap dealers there are in the state, and I don't think they're licensed, so there's no way to really know how many scrap dealers there are in the state, to the best of our knowledge, statewide anyway. Mr. Copeland did mention to me, when I asked him how many scrap dealers he thought there were, he said he thought there were about 250, and I asked him how many were members of the association where they do such great work in education and awareness, and I think about 80 of the 250, so less than 1/3 are members of the association. So I would say it's not those 1/3 that we're talking about here. It's the 170 or so others that we have no idea the practices they're operating by.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I have 3 people signed up from Farm Bureau. Mr. Harvey, Moody, and Chanel. Can y'all all come up at the same time or have one point person?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. You want to wait? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Jeffrey Harvey with Georgia Farm Bureau. We are a volunteer farmer organization with local county chapters in every county in the state, and we represent farmers on regulatory and legislative issues. And I'd like to thank you for allowing us to testify, and we'll be brief because I think Mr. Mulholland probably made our case for us better than I can on how we've been mostly affected. The largest item that's been hit for us is our irrigation pivots, and I don't know if anyone here does not know what an irrigation pivot is. We've been talking a lot about them, so I brought some pictures of them so we could pass them around and see. But what those are irrigation systems that are electrically operated, and we use them in our operations for planting season and in times of tough drought, which a lot of cases makes the difference between whether we are profitable on the year or not. They're in the fields away from our homes, and they're out there with big flashing lights on them. Well, not literally flashing lights, but a big sign on, basically saying, an easy target for theft for people to hit, because they're out in the middle of the fields, and we can't patrol them all night long. But what we've been told is how they're being hit is they have much copper wire on there, and a lot of times the thieves will unhook a section of it and hook it to their truck and ride down beside the pivot and just basically strip all the wire off, ripping all the sprinkler heads off, and what amounts to $50, $60 possibly. It cost us tens of thousands to repair those. I've got some farmers here that came up from South Georgia and from over in Greene County that's actually been affected by this, and we hope to allow them to, if it's okay with you, to make some comments and actually put a face on some of these victims that we've been talking about and tell their side of the story. But first off, we have Mr. Lannis Moody. He is from Ware County, and he's a dairy farmer from down there. And at this time if he'd like to make some comments.
I would just ask you to pull the mic to you.
All right. I was victimized. I'm Lannis Moody from Ware County, and I was victimized twice. They first, I can tell y'all probably gonna laugh. The first time, I kind of laughed a little bit. I said, "Well, you know, they got it. Something's gonna happen." 2 months later, get it again, and it made me mad. I mean, you feel like you're being raped or something, you know. I mean, it's pretty bad. But they did $26,000 worth of damage. That's what it cost to replace it. And we weighed the wire because we was curious. And they probably sold about approximately $1,500 worth of copper. That's basically what they got.
I'll just second. Ms. Ramsey.
Well, did you want to? Well,
I didn't know if you had a question
well,
for him.
when they was it the center pivot?
Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. It's center pivots.
Okay.
4 of them.
So the $27,000. What do you think the value of the actual copper that could you even venture?
It was about $1,500 worth of copper.
So $1,500, and is it so the remainder was damaged just to repair the property, or did it cause damage to your crops or?
Well, during winter time, so there wasn't no damage to the crops.
Okay.
And if I might expand on that, he is a dairy farmer, and they have a lot of liquid manure, and they actually funnel that down into basically gray water is what you would call it, and they will irrigate that back onto the crops as fertilizer. And they're required to pump those levels down by EPD over a certain amount of time. And I don't know if in this situation or not, it actually puts you in question of violating certain regulations that we as farmers have to abide by, just by having those pieces of equipment out of production. But they every 6 weeks or so, when those manure holding facilities reach a certain level, they have required by EPA to pump those back on to the fields.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Moody.
All right.
The witness want to testify?
And we have Mr. Chanel from Greene County too that's been affected by this.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
I'm Dean Chanel from Greene County. I'm president of the Greene County Farm Bureau. I'm chairman of the Greene County Board of Commissioners also. I'm a beef cattle farmer. I was in the dairy business for 22 years, and in 1998 I sold my dairy herd. At that time, I had some tenant houses where guys that worked for me lived, and when I sold the herd, I didn't need the workers anymore, and I decided that I might fix the houses up a little bit and rent them out to provide some income. In 98, one of the tenant houses I went in, and it was an old house. It was built back in the 30s, and you weren't really able to put wire up and down inside the wall, so what we did, we put conduit, plastic conduit, throughout the house and ran wire through it. So the conduit was exposed with the wire inside. Last year someone came in and they took some type of piece of metal, an axe or something, and they broke every piece of conduit. They broke it at the floor, they broke it at the bottom of the switch, they broke it at the top of the switch, and then up at the light fixture. And also the wall outlets, they did the same thing, broke it at the bottom and then broke it up at the outlet itself, so they could reach in there and cut the wire and strip the wire out. When I had that rewired in 98, it was around $2,000 is what it cost. But when they went to break the conduit, you have to hit it pretty hard, so therefore you put a hole through your ceiling and through your wall. So you're not doing only the damage to the conduit and taking the wire out, you're costing a good bit to repair it. Now, I've not made these repairs. I would estimate it would probably cost me $7,000 or $8,000 to repair this damage. I asked an electrician that put the wire in the house, I said, you know, at today's prices that they got for the wire, how many dollars worth do you think they got? And he said maybe $300. So they made a pretty good haul. They made $300, but I lost $8,000. Now, in my case, the house was insured, but it hadn't been occupied in 30 days, and therefore, for any type of vandalism, I was not covered. So that's a total loss to me. I know that a lot of folks would have same kind of stories to tell you, but a lot of people have the insurance, and what they do is they say, okay, I had a $5,000 air conditioning unit. They stole the copper out of it. It was 10 years old. I paid a $200 deductible. My insurance company gave me a new one, $8,000 So they came out okay. They didn't lose that much. In my case, they also went into the air conditioner units, and they cut a little piece of copper out, probably worth $2 or $3. But now the air conditioning unit's no good. They pulled my refrigerator out, cut the copper out of it. Now $300 refrigerator is worthless. They also stole the pigtail off of the oven. So in my case, I was not able to recover anything, lost all of it, and have not repaired it, and probably won't, which it could have been a fairly decent rental property. Also, yesterday when I mentioned this to the PIO in the county, he said, "Oh, really? You're going to go testify about stealing copper?" He said, "Well, my church got hit last summer. They stole the copper out of the air conditioning unit in the sanctuary, stole it out of the Sunday school rooms, and it cost us $8,700. And he said, "You know, I was talking with the guy down in Warren County where I used to go to church, and the same thing happened to them." So you don't hear about all this copper being stolen, but a tremendous amount is, and it's not just that the amount of copper, it's the amount of damage that is done to property in stealing the copper. Thank you.
Well, Jeff, you didn't garner any questions, so good job. So, but thank you so much for being here.
We appreciate any help y'all could give us on this.
But time out. You got a question? Just hit your button real quick. Okay.
Gentlemen from Ware County and from where? Greene County. We just want to thank you for coming all the way up here because, you know, we know it takes time out of your busy schedule, but it's very important that we hear from you. And I just want to say thank you. Usually on the opposite end of some of my colleagues who are traditionally against plaintiff attorneys and defense criminals, I am with this particular proposition. We got to do something about this because you're right, and I'm not a witness, but I own rental property, and it's just ridiculous. I've had air conditioners go missing and all of that, and then the holes in the wall, they'll pull it even through the wall. I mean, but thank you for coming up, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Got Maureen Martin and Joe Belay. Did I hit that right? Y'all going up? They're going.
I didn't even ask my question. That's okay. I'll ask somebody else. That's okay.
I thought you was doing the comment. You were done with the comment.
I know.
I'm not a farmer. You can ask
Yeah,
me.
I just want to ask them if they'll come back. If they can, Mr. Chairman. It really is simple. It's
Well, we got Jeff back, so before I let y'all get going, we'll let.
Yeah. I really.
Quicker.
I'm one of the guys. I try to balance all this thing, and because, you know, it's your cousin that's sick on drugs or something else. But I want to ask this question, and you may or may not have an answer. But I brought up in another committee. Could we make them do restitution? I think restitution is in the bill now, or is it? Restitution is in the bill now.
That's current law.
It's already there.
Oh, it's current law? I didn't see it. Okay. Okay. Other places, but we have restitution. Do you have any suggestions about how do we, because is it just the neighborhood crackhead or the alkie that's doing this, or is it more sophisticated criminals? Because I'm personally interested in trying to stop it, but at the same time, I want to have a penalty that's going to hit if they're doing it as a commercial enterprise, that's one thing, but if they're sick and they're drug head, I want to maybe do something to make them go get some help and make it real inconvenient. So I'm not just looking at, I want to slap them, but I want to know who am I slapping? Who's doing this in Greene County and in Ware County?
That's my personal opinion.
Yes, sir.
It's the drugs.
The drugs.
I think the drugs push most of it.
And I think, just to expand on that, I can't draw an opinion as to if it's organized crime or if it's people with drug addiction or what, but I think the zero cash for copper is a huge element of the bill, simply because those guys are, with those problems, are looking for a quick fix.
Right.
And they cause a lot more damage to the people that they offend.
Right.
For that small amount of money, and if one more step in the process would probably help curb some of that.
So
that's one of the strongest things for us in the bill.
So if you know that,
fast money, I mean, you know, it's fast.
so if they can't get fast money, you think that'll just leave it alone?
In my case, we were pretty certain.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
We were pretty certain who the person was, and he was more a career criminal. Just pretty much petty stuff, but before we could really go after him enough to get him pinned down to this particular one, there was an outstanding warrant for him in Gainesville, so he was carried out of the county, and I assume Funny's there. Didn't do me any good, but in that case, it was a career criminal.
Thank you, guys. We really appreciate that.
Thank y'all again.
Thank you.
Okay, if y'all want to go ahead now.
Hi, my name is Maureen Martin, and I want to thank the committee for hearing my testimony today. I'm with Schnitzer Southeast. We are part of 9 locations that we have here in the state of Georgia. We're also part of Schnitzer Steel Industries, which is a publicly traded company. And I just want to appreciate all the legislators for doing their parts and trying to combat metal theft, and as we as a company are also trying to do the same. Right now, we as a recycling company with those 9 locations, we process millions of pounds on a monthly basis. And I'm one of many, many recyclers, and I know the question's been asked how many recyclers are in the state of Georgia. I would estimate probably 250 to 400. I did want to just make mention that the ISRI Foundation there's a fee involved, and some of these smaller locations, it's based upon fees. So if they're not part of that, that's one of the reasons they may not be an ISRI member. We are an ISRI member as Schnitzer Southeast, and I just want to let you know that already under the current laws, we are following 16 regulations, and on the current legislation that's at hand, we are probably already following a lot of it, which we have already met with stakeholders before and tried to come up with some resolution and discussion about our concerns. And that's what I'm here today to ask you is that all of these things that are in this bill, they will cost us money. And whether it's an undue burden or a burden, the burden is different on each one of our businesses. And those burdens could actually cost jobs in the state of Georgia. And that's what we're looking at. And we are doing our best to combat and work with everyone. And Joe Bulat will talk about what we're doing with law enforcement. But not only are we doing these 16 rules already, we're going above and beyond. And then also we have Sarbanes-Oxley that we deal with on a daily basis. So we have many controls federally as well. So the burden of costs is huge. I will just address one of the areas that was a concern of ours, and the cost of the checks. I realize that we're trying to go after the criminal, and one of the things that we look at also as a company is the cost of a check. There's more associated with just writing a check, and for a large company, there is probably a $20, $30 cost associated with writing checks. And if we have 9 locations, we do a couple hundred to 500 to 700 checks a day times 9 locations, you can start to see that starts to get expensive. It's additional employees that we would have to hire. You know what? We're a big company. We're going to do what you all tell us to do. We're just asking for reasonable, and we're asking for you all to just say what's reasonable burden upon us. I did also want to just statement on this HB 177 is we have a lot of long-standing relationships with industrial and businesses. There is no mention in here that this excludes business-to-business relationships. If we have to start doing this I have to go ask my industrial metal where they're getting every single bit of this metal on every single transaction. The cost of doing business for them is going to be great as well. And I think that nowhere in this bill does that have that. and that's a big concern of ours. And that is basically what I wanted to say, and I ask for reasonableness, and we are not trying to be part of the problem. We are trying to all be here as part of the solution.
Ms. Martin, Representative Magrum's got a question for you.
Sure.
Thank you, ma'am, for coming down, and again, we know that you've taken your time out, and we appreciate it. But and I was even thinking about the business-to-business part myself, and then I was thinking, well, where are they getting it from? And let me ask you, what quantities is your average? Because you're pretty big.
Yes,
what is the average transaction? What is the weight of the amount of the copper that come in, for example, or whatever the metal?
We have all different transactions, from a pound to, I work with Georgia EMCs and Georgia Power, and we have truckloads come in and it's not all separated. So
okay.
it is a vast variety.
But
we get them from industrial accounts, gutter manufacturers, gutter contractors. We get them from roofing companies. We have a varied. We have refrigerator manufacturers. We have all of these industrial accounts.
Okay,
as well.
Okay, let me ask this question this way then. Of the 1 pounds that come in, or of the 10 pounds, or less than 20 pounds, how many of those, what percentage would you think of your business is persons with less than 20 pounds that come in?
I can't, I'm not in accounting, so I couldn't give you that. I would love to give you
I'm just
an
trying
answer.
to get a ballpark. Is it 20% of your business, 10% of your business?
I don't know. I'm an industrial commodity buyer, so
okay.
my concern is my big customer. I don't work the
okay.
scale, so.
All right.
So.
All right. If someone else could answer that question, because if you have a business and you have a contract with Georgia Power, probably you don't bill them every day, every time they bring a load anyway. You pay them maybe once a week or once a month, or how do you?
No, we pay them.
On the spot?
No, we pay them on that load.
On that load every time? And you all already write them checks, or you don't write them checks?
Industrials, we usually do write checks, unless we have certified copies of letters from the company that they're looking for some other form.
I'm trying to get to the, okay, let me tell you.
I might be able to answer what you're saying.
Okay.
On those loads, those checks are cut out of corporate. We have different locations. We have a ferrous operation, non-ferrous operation. I think you're talking about the drive-up, walk-up traffic, peddler traffic, as we refer to. We could have any place from 200 people to 1,000 people, depending on what the market is doing. Are we able to provide you with hard numbers of how many out of those 500 people come up with 1 to 10 pounds to 20 pounds of copper? No, sir. That's something that we are not able to provide. The checks that you're talking about for the large accounts, such as the EMCs, Georgia Power, and the commercial accounts, those are usually done every day. There's always a check. It's done at a separate location, which is a corporate location, which doesn't have anything to do with the peddler traffic that comes in for the scales.
Okay, what I'm trying to get to is the peddler traffic, because there's more of what we're probably dealing with when we're dealing with the thieves. But if they're, there may be someone so sophisticated to get into the other area. But what I'm hearing is the drug. I think that. Well, I want to know who's doing the crimes, and I'm trying to get to it. Okay, fine, thank you. I'll wait to anything else.
Is there any other questions for me?
Not for right now.
Okay.
So.
Joe Bulat, Director of Security for Schnitzer Southeast, retired law enforcement here with Atlanta. I've been doing law enforcement and security for the last 30 years. The traffic that you're talking about is coming in with individuals, just like they said earlier, our meth heads, our crack addicts, things such as that. At Schnitzer, we do not take walk-in traffic with individuals pushing shopping carts coming in. That doesn't happen. you have to have a vehicle to actually come onto our property and bring your scrap metal that's being brought in. What I do, I chair part of the Metro Atlanta Metal Task Force, which includes City of Atlanta PD, DeKalb County, Gwinnett County, Cobb County, Riverdale, Peachtree City. A lot of the metro area law enforcement entities meet once a month. It used to be once a week when copper prices were so high. Now it's once a month. We meet at police headquarters on the 7th floor at CID here in Atlanta. We disseminate information. We have a website. We post alerts. It's working. That's how we catch people. 2 days ago, we knocked off a jackleg operation in an apartment over in northwest Atlanta off of Fox Street, commonly known as the Bluff over in that area. The entire apartment was full of copper. They even had a small scale there. There was a stolen car out front. The car was stolen out of Cartersville. They set up on it, brought a wrecker in. Of course, people didn't want the car taken away. So they come out. People were detained. Search warrants were obtained for the residence or for the apartment. They go in, they find all this stuff. We contact Georgia Power out. Georgia Power is pretty good about marking some of their stuff that they have out there. Able to identify it. Complaint room is notified. Paperwork is processed. We turn around. Now, this is the hilarious part of it. Take them to the jail. The jail would not take them. Under the current law, deputies at the jail, we don't know what this law is. The DA's office, this is the first time now, the DA's office had to run on the internet, the Nexus Lexus, I think you referred to it a while ago, a copy of the law to accompany the arrest ticket and report to these individuals before they would take them into intake. My point is, the law that we have, I'm looking at this, we do quite a bit, just about everything. Photographs, I'm talking about our video we watch. We have a pretty detailed security department to protect our own assets as well and assist the police in what we're doing. But the DAs, the police, the sheriffs, they don't understand. Most of us deal with Title 16. They don't understand what Title 10 is. They don't go anything really past Title 16. But then again, when you look at it, even with this title, with the current law now, you could utilize Title 16 for these individuals, such as criminal damage to property, and basically in whatever degree the damage is. It can be a felony. I love what you have here on this Section 4, but let's make it a felony for these guys and put them in jail. But the problem is getting the enforcement and putting and keeping these individuals in jail. We have very strict policy and procedures in what we take in over there. They call me on a daily basis, our scale guys. And they'll tell me, hey, we got this in, we got that in. We check our alert notifications. I call APD. I talk to Lieutenant Kavanagh there. That's our contact person there. Peachtree City Police's contact. They came out yesterday, Detective Sanchez. They had, within a, I say, 15, 30-day period, they lost some relatively unique items of copper, some copper tips. 400 boxes, 30 pounds each box. We put that information out and disseminated it statewide. It has not surfaced yet, which leads me to believe it's gone underground. Somebody else is probably moving it because it hasn't came back up. They have 2 suspects. I could have very easily turned around and looked at the first name that the detective gave me, which did not match any of our records. However, I concentrated on the Peachtree City address. Yes, we did have a hit, and it was actually his father that had brought something in. It wasn't what they were looking for, But hopefully this generated enough leads so that they can work the case even further without us just saying, oh, yeah, we don't have it. Getting to identifying stuff. This is the kind of stuff we get. Now, where did this come from? Well, based on looking at it, of course, I'm, retired law enforcement. Pretty dirty. Looks like it probably came underground someplace. Now, what the EMCs have failed to disclose is the EMCs are part of our task force. Their investigators come to our meetings. We had Lisa Bowles from AT&T there yesterday at the meeting. They turned around, and I'll quote their investigators, majority of our large thefts are from contractors and subcontractors that we utilize or has worked with us previously. That's why we're not seeing so many people electrocuted out there. They know what they're doing. So when you look at that and you take everything in general, we're the police officers or the police departments and the sheriff's department's best bet in combating crime and these issues. Because if we take a picture of this, I guarantee you that Mr. DA that was set up here earlier, he can have this all he wants. But if he hasn't done his CSI homework and matched up a crimping tool with the ends of this, he's not going to he is no more going to charge anybody with a crime with a picture of this than he would with this. And that's what I'm getting at. We got the laws. Let's beef them up. The penalties, that's what we need to look at. I'm all for putting people in jail. We do it. We've done it with manhole covers until the Fulton DA's office told us not to do it anymore. I was handcuffing people out there, calling APD, getting them out there. We put about 4 or 5 people in jail over that. Then all of a sudden, boom. Okay, you guys got to stop because we can't determine who the actual victim is, which now, Stamp City of Atlanta, I was thinking with my police experience that was the victim, but apparently something goes on during the course of the action where those manhole covers are transferred or given to developers and things like that, which in turn they say it's their property at that time. So it seems to be an issue of having an actual victim. It gets very complicated. It's not a simple thing. It seems like by putting all this stuff in, it's more of a burden for us. If we communicate and we run these task forces, I'm supposed to go to Columbus and Muskogee County this afternoon. We're ramping up a task, trying to ramp up one there, which will, mesh with the Metro Atlanta one. Chip Kopp and Macon, excellent job. We modeled what we're doing here in Atlanta after that. Headland, talking about the farmers, dealt with a investigator yesterday from Headland, Alabama, assisted them in solving farm equipment theft. We actually helped them with that. So if we don't turn around and getting back to the substations, passing legislation like this would be passing legislation requiring substations to put alarms on every substation in the state of Georgia, and on their poles, just like overseas at certain locations, having tamper-proof wires. In other words, you tamper with them, an alarm goes sent out. Once a lot of wires cut, an alarm should be sent out. That way, no one's life is endangered, except for that certain point where that individual's cutting at. That's kind of what I see, and I ask for your support in not passing this bill and any other bill that's going to continue to try to regulate the business. When you come to our plant, you see what we do. We have over 200 cameras here in the southeast. It's live time at our control center. We take security serious, and that's why we have these task force. That's why we work with AT&T, the East and Georgia Power to combat this effort. That's about all I got to say.
Representative Ramsey.
And I appreciate all of your company's efforts in that regard. I don't if every company put those measures in place, and I realize most of them are as large as you and have the resources you do to do that, we wouldn't be sitting here. Of the 250 to 400, whatever the number is, how many companies would you say have as robust a security operation as yours?
I would say your medium to larger companies. How many?
So how many have 20 cameras like you do?
I would probably say out of how many?
What the number she cited?
Out
She
of
said
80 that's registered with ISRI, or the other
the
ones
whole universe of. But is that just kind of a?
Yeah, I could only say for the ones that I've seen, a medium-sized company out of 250, I would probably say maybe half. 20 cameras.
And that's of the how many recyclers would you of the 400? Say there's 400.
Okay.
And there's 80 that's registered with
ISRI, yes, national.
With ISRI. Okay. So the vast majority of the recyclers in the state are not registered with ISRI.
That's correct.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that they're not legally binding companies. I mean,
oh
they're
no,
good businesses.
I'm not. I would never suggest that. But of those say there's 400, and we're just I'm guessing here of the ones that are not part of ISRI. What is there a way to kind of quantify how their security efforts are their security programs, what they have in place?
If it is a small operation, their security program may be them living there next door to their property or to their business. It may mean just one camera or 2 cameras versus 200, such like we have. It could be in a fenced area where instead of alarm, because of economic conditions, they may have a watchdog out there. It's extremely tough to say. But the current law, sir, applies to them as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about enforcement. If we can enforce what we've got, and yes, let's turn around. I would really like to have seen SB, I think it's 52 and 53, where we seize the criminals' cars that come in that's hauling this stuff, and we turn around and put them on a registry where all of us can turn around if there was some way possible to have them on the computer where it comes up and pops in our face. Hey, this is a metal thief. Don't buy from them. I can assure you, we're not going to buy from them, and the majority of the reputable dealers are not going to buy from them. And if the police catch anybody that does buy from them, then yes, let's put them in jail. Let's charge them with a felony.
I couldn't agree with you more, and that's why we've tried to give them a little more tools in that regard, and that you referenced Section 4 to come down on these folks that are doing this. You said y'all are doing a lot of these things.
We do some of
what
them.
Do you
we don't make a copy of the driver's license and stuff.
We type it in.
We type all the information in with the driver's license number into our system, into our ROM system, which in turn
and tag number.
Yeah, tag number, description of the vehicle. What we do, we do integrity checks at our scales. I have individuals come in with certain things that I know they can't turn around and purchase because the law says they can't, such as an urn or a plaque off a grave site. Let one of our scale guys take that, and he'll be unemployed.
But those are being trafficked in Georgia to among. I mean, there are.
No, they're not.
There are not in your company, but there are recyclers in Georgia that have accepted.
If they do, it has to be with a mortuary or an individual with a letter from a mortuary, which also has to have the proper ID that's already in the current law, the proper ID, photo ID, and everything. And we take that information, we keep that stuff, because we will not buy anything like that. And the other recyclers know they are not to buy anything like that.
But
it goes back to my point, what the gentleman said earlier that I wrote down, which I found it rather funny. His suspect came with a spool of copper. The guy came in a utility uniform. You know, that right there, a lot of these companies, they turn around, they send their scrap to us with uniformed individuals that have to have the proper ID. We won't buy stuff on a spool, and we don't even tell people to go and cut it off the spool. You know, we do. We may be the exception and ask, hey, where'd you guys get this? You know, but what are they going to say? We found it, we did this. And then what happens in that case? We have such a good working relationship with Metro law enforcement that I call them after my scale guy calls me, and I say, hey, I got this guy here. I got this type of material. Do we have an alert or a bulletin or anything going out on it? What do you want me to do with it? Hey, buy it, set it to the side. You got all this information, right? Roger that. We've got it. Set it off to the side. Something comes up that hasn't been reported yet. Guess what? We just got this guy. We just nailed him. You know, it's communication. If we can communicate, work these task force, I'm confident that we can combat this. Macon has showed us they can.
Well, I guess one last question. What I agree that I've heard great things about that task force in Macon and what y'all are doing up here. But what is it about Georgia and about the market for scrap metal that makes us one of the leaders in the country in per capita instances of metal theft? I mean, is it purely a function that our sheriffs and our police officers are not doing a good job? Is that your suggestion?
I'm retired Atlanta, and I'll say this: we're not educated to the point where we know what the law is, so that we can enforce this law. So if you're not educated in regards to the law, you're going to be hesitant to enforce the law.
So what are other states doing to educate their law enforcement? So they're doing, because they're obviously doing a better job than us. I mean,
well,
help me.
I have to disagree, because if you look at Ohio, they put all these other stringent rules in place, the toughest laws in the state, but yet they're still number one in copper theft. So do we want to model ourselves after that and copper thefts continue?
I've looked at the Ohio law. This is not even in the same universe as what they've done. And I would never even suggest we go to
right.
where
That's
that
right.
would
but
be.
But you see the difference. It's still, they're number one in the nation.
Well, that law is fairly new, and I think it's still the jury's out on how effective it's going to be. But I
think communication.
That's the key. That's
from who to who?
From from recyclers, from what we're doing, and don't get me
wrong. Let me interrupt you for just a second. Let's have some direct questions and direct answers. This is begin to turn into a little bit of debate, which is fine, because everything needs to be debated. But there's questions being asked, and that turns immediately into a debate without an answer. So let's try to stick with a question-answer scenario in the committee room. Okay. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Question again.
I think we had gone as far as in terms of down that road on that question. So your suggestion is communication between the police officers and the law enforcement community and the scrap or the recyclers. That's the answer.
And put the individuals that are in violation, put them in jail. As same as with the criminals. We're losing focus here. It's the criminals we need to be targeting.
And I just have a couple more questions, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay. And I will finish up. Would you agree with the statement that the vast majority of stolen copper stolen metal that's been stolen that makes it, and I'm sure you don't have as much make it onto your yard as a percentage because of the amazing kind of security program you have, but the vast majority of the metal that's stolen that makes it onto recycled yard they're unknowingly accepting it. Would you agree?
They're knowingly?
No, they're unknowingly they're unknowingly paying.
I would say that's accurate.
Okay. And so what we have is a situation where and I believe that wholeheartedly that very, very, very few recycle. Of course, every industry has some bad apples, are accepting stolen property knowingly. I mean, there's been some really egregious examples. The manhole covers with the city stamped on it, but that's I don't think that's any way indicative of the industry. But we do have a situation where there is a finite number of places where this property, and I know we're not going to be able to deal with the guy that's sending it to China to be recycled. So what we're trying to do is kind of strike that balance, and it sounds like you guys are entering in the driver's license when it comes in.
Most definitely.
And you're writing a check at, I think you testified in subcommittee. There was it 300? Maybe that was another recycler. There was
another recycler.
Okay, but most recyclers have a threshold right now over which they're writing a check, and we're trying to, that's trying to figure that out. So, if we put this requirement that we keep a copy of the driver's license in place, it would simply require you to get a copy machine. Is that right? Or I guess you could require the person bringing in the property to bring a copy of their driver's license with their.
We would have to probably put it into our software program, and the reason being is to tie it to all your photograph requirements. It would have to be tied to that photograph, to that transaction, to.
Just because of the complexity of your operation.
That's correct.
Because we have an enterprise software, which is huge.
Okay.
And then if, let's say it goes down for whatever reason, I guess my concern at that point in time, as a retired law enforcement officer, I would use that against the recycler.
If your copying machine went down?
Copying machine, if our software machine went down, everything.
But if your system went down now, there's a ton of records you have to keep already. It's still a situation you'd have to deal with under the current law, correct?
I'm sorry?
I mean, your system, if it were to go down today, if this law was never passed, you still have to deal with the system going down because of all these other records you already required to keep, correct?
But yes, we'd end up having to do it manually.
Right, so that would just require you to and if your copying machine went down for a couple of hours or a day or two, and you could require the person bringing the driver's license in to go get a photocopy of it and bring it in with it as a stopgap.
We're going to require the customer to bring in a copy of their.
No, I would hope you would deal with your copy machine, but in an emergency situation, you're out of toner, your copy machine goes down for a short time. There.
Well, my point that I'm getting at with that section is that it offers no protection to us if we turn around and continue with the transactions that we're doing because we can't make a photocopy of an ID. So what do we do? Do we stop business altogether?
If this
shut our gates?
You either fix I would suggest you either get your copier fixed or you require that they run out and get a photocopy of their license. But
that's a very burden on not only on us on the responsibility with this, but also on the client. Not everyone that we're dealing with are criminals.
I would say 99.99% of the people you're dealing with are not criminals.
Exactly.
And I think that's I would agree with that. But I think I've gone about as far as I want to go. I just want to say I really appreciate all your company does as a company to combat metal theft, and I appreciate y'all taking your time to be here.
And we thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, sir.
Representative Byrd.
Thank you for your testimony. I'm going to move away from the criminal for a minute. Do you take anything else? I mean, if I'm a normal, everyday citizen and I have stuff that I want to recycle, do I bring it to you?
If you have an old washing machine, an old hot water heater, things like that, an old stove, yes, ma'am, you can bring it in a truck. You can bring it. That's what's called our Ferris. It comes to another yard, and it's the same situation that's set up there. We bring it in, you bring it in on your truck, we turn around, weigh you in, you come in, we get it off for you for recycling. You come back out, get the tear weight on your truck, and then print up a ticket with your information, driver's license, that stuff, and it's inputted. You go over and get paid.
Okay, so my question then is, since I have a washing machine that I need to get rid of, if all these new regulations are placed with all this new stuff, me as a regular everyday person that is very conscientious about our environment, why would I want to start recycling my stuff if I'm going to have to go through all of this stuff that we're now talking about in this bill?
Well, you're absolutely right, because inside those washing machines there are copper products. There are wiring. There are things such as that, and this would put an extreme burden on us, as well as with the what we call sculling, trying to get this product out. It'd be pretty tough.
So if I'm the everyday citizen, probably it would not drive me to go and recycle my stuff.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Representative Ramsey.
I want to respond to that, Representative Byrd. Right now, under current law, if I want to recycle my washing machine, I have to take with me a photo ID. And I also have to write all this information down. The only additional thing I, as a consumer, would have to do is write a description of where the property came from. I would have to, if you're recycling your washing machine, you'd have to write on the form that you already have to fill out. It's my own personal washing machine. I would, and I know we're asking questions of witnesses, but I would suggest to you that you already have to have a photo ID in your hand when you go to engage in one of these transactions. Is that correct?
Yes.
So other than having to write where you got the property from, there is no additional burden on the consumer whatsoever. I think we're about to go down a road where we're debating each other.
I think we're now
maybe we can
let's do that in our chair on that.
We could still got a few more speakers. You got another question?
I did, but it just went out of my brain. No, okay, yes, I do have a question. All right, so here I am, this person that really wants to take care of our environment. People in my neighborhood where I live, there's 1,380 homes, and I have a pickup truck, and so during the day or in the evening after people put their garbage out, and I see that they have also placed their washing machine, their lawnmowers, you name it, all sorts of things are out there. So I pack it in my truck, now take it to you, the recycler, and so you get all my information, and so then what happens if I then tell you, well, the washer is mine, but I decided I'd go out and drive my neighborhood and pick everybody's stuff up. I'm going to have to tell you exactly where that I went to your home, picked up your lawnmower. I went to 1825. I went to this house and this house.
That's correct.
Okay.
Under 177, that's exactly right. You're going to have to explain exactly where you got it.
Thank you very much.
Representative Everson.
Thank you. I know we've been here for an exorbitant amount of time, and I tell you what, but something just dropped on me that I just thought about. As a former city councilman and former mayor of the city of Snellville, which has its own recycling center where citizens bring used refrigerators, freezers, stoves that has copper in them. When I take that to a recycling center such as yours or Renewal, is that city required to document where every piece of that recyclable merchandise has come from? Because in Snellville, we don't. We just show the ID until, like most cities that maintain and operate their own, they just allow you to come in and get rid of the recyclable and just dump it over to the city, and the city sells it.
Under current, under this
I'm
law,
just asking.
Under this law, I believe that you would be considered, the city of Snellville would be considered a secondary recycler.
You're referring to current law. I mean that.
I'm asking on this proposal
here. There's already a number of things in current law. If I would check to make sure the city of Snellville is complying with current law, but all this does is require that in addition to the other things that you're keeping, you keep a copy of the photo ID that you're already required to show them, and the person that's getting the money write a description of the property. So
and a photograph.
Right. And a photograph of the property. That's right.
That's the crux of my question. In Snellville, you just have to show a photo ID.
Right, right.
And now we're requiring them to make a copy of it.
That's right. If this was to pass.
You would have to do that. That
Right.
Snellville would have to do that.
The city of Snellville would have to do that. Okay. That's what I want. Thanks.
Okay, no other questions. We appreciate you bringing.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Hunter Hopkins. I done thought maybe you left, but you was hiding behind the pole on me.
I'm not talking about company.
I'll be brief.
I am too, but I know if I adjourn this, y'all will never come back. So we're going to knock this out.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Hunter Hopkins with the Georgia Automobile Dealers Association. Surprisingly enough, I'm not talking about copper. Our concern are catalytic converters. Catalytic converters are a key component of an automobile's emission system. They help make the gases that are coming from the engine, they go through the catalytic converter. It makes it a little bit safer as it goes through the rest of the exhaust system and through the muffler to make it, safe for the environment. One of the main things that causes that chemical reaction in the catalytic converter is platinum. There's also palladium and rhodium, which are three very, especially platinum, three very precious metals, which a lot of people can get a lot of money for them. We've had many of our dealerships hit around the state. Most often, there has been either a pickup truck or an SUV, something that sits a little bit higher, because what you can do is with a little Sawzall, battery operated, you can hop under there, make two cuts, and the thing will pretty much fall right off. It's average cost to replace those with a GM, General Motors, for a full-size pickup truck is about $600. Some of the foreign-made cars are a little bit more expensive. I've had a few dealers that sell some of the U-Haul type vans and minibuses like they use down at the airport at the park and ride. Some of those things have two catalytic converters on them, and some of the bigger engines, catalytic converter can cost up to $1,000, $1,300 depending on the make and the model. What happens is somebody, whether it be just straight up criminals or drug addicts, somebody is coming onto the dealership after hours, getting under the vehicles, cutting out the converters, and taking them and selling them somewhere. I don't know. I'm not accusing anybody. They're just going somewhere and being sold for the platinum and the other precious metals that are contained in them. There's really no way for us to identify a catalytic converter because under federal law, unfortunately, you aren't supposed to tamper with any part of the emission system, and there's a concern that could be, if you paint it or, put a VIN number or something on it, it could be considered tampering with a catalytic converter. I'm not an attorney, so I don't know all that. But it's a major problem for us because my dealers, in order to sell the vehicle, they've got to replace the catalytic converter. Sometimes they have to replace additional pipes, and at times even the entire emissions and exhaust system, which can cost anywhere between $800 to $2,000 depending on the vehicle and what's been messed up. We support some type of legislation that's going to help out with the metal theft. I know that the recyclers do a lot of commercial business. I'm sure many of them have industrial accounts with body shops or muffler shops, and they're bringing catalytic converters in by the truckloads and recycling them, I hope. But if somebody's showing, and there are other scrap yards out there that do this as well, but if somebody's coming in with 10 or 12 or whatever number of catalytic converters, all from GM pickup trucks, personally I got to ask, you sure these are legit, and if they all have saw marks on the on the pipe where they've been ripped out. But that's not up to me to make that decision. So that's our concern. We support this bill, and anything that we can do to help stop this problem here in the state of Georgia.
Well, there's no questions, so appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Wait, time out. How hungry are you? Do you got a question?
I do. I'm going to ask this one quick question.
Okay.
I'm hung up on this whole picture thing. Now, if someone has a whole bucket of these the converters, are you going to be able to identify those through a picture? So if I have a big bucket of these things,
you could probably. It's the way the manufacturers work, like Ford. It's Ford, Lincoln, Mercury.
Mm-hmm.
All theirs. More than likely, you could tell that it is a Ford catalytic converter from a certain, a four-door sedan. You could tell if it was a Ford pickup, came from a Ford pickup truck or sport utility. It's really, you could tell the difference between a Ford catalytic converter and possibly one that's a GM. I know you can tell a huge difference between what the domestic manufacturers use versus the foreign. But I mean, it's. I think if I'm trying to think, Representative Byrd, if one of my dealers is missing 15 catalytic converters from his Isuzu box cube vans or box trucks, and somebody shows up with a couple of those type of, the matching catalytic converter, I think you could definitely make that connection.
Okay.
So, yes, ma'am.
Representative Ramsey, and I'm going to watch y'all's seats real close. You're going to wave? Okay. Emily Bagwell.
I'm going to be really short and even bring notes up. I'm Emily Bagwell. I represent the Georgia Association of Property and Casualty Insurance Companies. That's GAPSIC. It's a trade association comprised of insurance companies based here in Georgia. And our interest is basically that we do not like to pay claims based on copper thefts or any kind of thefts like along those lines. And as we have to pay claims, it gets built into our rate-making structure, and ultimately that gets passed back to everybody who purchases that type of insurance from that particular company. So we support the efforts to decrease the metal thefts problems in Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you. Lauren Wilkes.
Good afternoon.
Well, you did tell me this is the first time you're in front of this committee, so you got lucky. It's been worn down a little bit.
I'm scared. Thank y'all, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for having us. I know everyone's getting hungry. I'm going to be very brief. I just want to come express the Georgia Chamber's position of support for this bill, and we ask for your support. As you've heard already, metal theft is a significant problem for Georgia businesses as well as governments across the state. The Georgia Chamber is a part of the coalition that Representative Ramsey mentioned earlier, that's made up of a broad group of business and associations who support this bill because of the impact that metal thefts having on their business. And we believe this legislation has meaningful components that can help fix this problem, and we hope a resolution can be met that puts teeth into Georgia's metal theft laws and helps stop the bad actors. Thank you for your time.
No questions. Yeah. We'll get you next time. Maria Zach.
Good afternoon. Maria Zach, representing the Georgia Recyclers. I just wanted to take a moment to set the record straight on a couple things. Mr. Chairman, 2 years ago, you were championing this issue with a little bit of foresight about what was to come. SB 203 passed, which gave the felony provision a quicker felony for those who steal these metals and destroy people's property, and we are very grateful for that law. What was interesting that we found out from the passage of that law is that, one, many of the prosecutors were not aware of this law, and number two, the biggest thing that came to light this session was that there are two titles that deal with these crimes, and Legislative Council was not aware that some of the laws and recommendations they were making for legislation were already included in a different title in the statute. If you look at Title 10-1-357, you will see Section 4 of the bill already done. There was a statement earlier today that the Georgia Recyclers do not support that, and I would vehemently oppose that statement. We not only supported it, we actively worked it and supported it in SB 203 and continue to support that provision. And we also want to make it very clear that we have many members across the state, and basically the volume of what they do is over 95% of the volume in this state. So we keep hearing that, oh, your guys are the good guys. Well, if our guys are the good guys, and they're not willingly nor knowingly taking these stolen items, then, what do we need to do? Where is it going? I think that it comes down to a simple issue of how many times does something trade hands before it ever gets to the final destination. We know that there are people stealing, and it's horrible crimes, and it's painful, costly, and sometimes life-threatening. We know that there have been people who have died. What a lot of people don't realize is that the recyclers had a security guard murdered this summer. It is a tragic time in our state when we have these crimes. What is fantastic about the state of Georgia, unlike other states, is that while prices spiked, with copper prices going over $4 a pound this summer, we actually had a great story to tell. Macon Middle Georgia created these metal theft task force models that literally reduced the crime by 80%. That is astonishing in today's world. It did not require a law, but it used the laws that exist right now today. What is fascinating is that now we were able to replicate that across Georgia. We have coalitions creating, and I think Mr. Bulett spoke to that from Schnitzer. He has been very active and involved in the task forces, and they're putting people in jail. You are going to see results from 2008 that actually increased in the number of people arrested because the recyclers are arresting them. Now, Mr. Knox asked in the subcommittee meeting last week, well, why are we trying to make recyclers law enforcement? I'm afraid to say you already did. The law was rewritten in the 1990s. That law was written by a gentleman named Steve Levitan, who is with Pull-Apart Company here in Georgia. He's written most of the laws across the Southeast. He wrote Florida's law. Florida just recently tweaked their law, but we have been almost identical in what we have been doing. Do our laws make people want to come to Georgia to paddle? I disagree vehemently with that for numerous reasons, especially because of the task forces. We've been written up in publications across the country and internationally for the great successes we've had, and we have now become the model state in the country. Trying to be like other states and replicating their laws to try to create an answer, obviously they made more regulations in Ohio and they had more crime. They had double the amount. Now, what's interesting about the report that just came out is that it said in a 2-year period, Georgia had 800 and some odd number of crimes. So let's just cut that in half and aim a little higher and say 450 a year. If it's 450 thefts a year, and the recyclers are doing millions of transactions with billions of pounds of metal, it's worse than looking for a needle in a haystack. So these recyclers have stepped up to the plate. They've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on their systems. And I know it seems like no big deal to ask them to take a driver's license or take a photograph or do this or do that. We've heard lots of testimony relevant to that. The company Schnitzer, when Schnitzer does a process and they take the information from the license, law enforcement's still able to pull up the license from that information because you're taking the number. So they still see the picture ID. Requiring a company to go take a photograph of it, a copy of it, whatever, is a burden that's actually repetitive because, as I'm sure, Mr. Chairman, in your law enforcement days, you know that system better than I do of how do you pull up a driver's license and a copy. My understanding is law enforcement is more than capable of doing that by the number that was on the driver's license. So is it right to put on additional burdens? There are over 16 burdens, regulations in Title 10. There's other burdens that they have as well that they have to abide by. Does it cost them money? Yes. But I will tell you this, and I want to make this very clear. The recyclers have come here today to say they will do everything in their power to continue to stop these crimes. They will continue to send the alerts. The alerts that get sent out from these metal theft task forces have resulted in great reductions in crime that we have proven, but also are aiding in the arrests. The alerts are going to continue to go, and when the alert is sent, in the Georgia law it says, and someone said earlier, oh, well, it's virtually impossible to get a recycler on whether that not they knew something was stolen. Well, guess what? The recyclers are telling on themselves. They're knowing because what they're doing is sending an alert to every recycler saying, here's what's missing. Now they have put a burden on themselves as an industry because law enforcement and prosecutors can go after them and say, here's your alert. You knew. Why did you take it? If they're corrupt, they're going to jail. And we hope they do if someone's breaking the law. That's what's great about the way our laws were written, with the foresight of experts that have been in this industry and have worked throughout the United States in writing these laws. So Georgia, for once, can tout. Not only are we ahead of the ball game, we were ahead back in the 90s when we rewrote our statutes based on the escalation of the cocaine use and thefts that took place then. We continue to be ahead because we have created these metal theft task forces that show results. and it's not just Macon Middle Georgia anymore. These coalitions are popping up across the state, and we're happy to report that other states are now emulating in our great success. And so with that, I want to just say that we applaud Representative Williams in his efforts, and we want to absolutely support the amendment that we have heard is coming from Representative Knox, and based on the recommendations from the subcommittee that came up last week, there were, I think, 2 or 3 provisions that came up. One in the copper provision of the law, and actually said that, let me pull it to make sure I have it in front of me. There was an issue about the payment by check on the copper property. The transmitting of the check has to be given to the person named who basically the driver's license came from. I think that Representative Williams said he was amenable to adding language, and my understanding is Representative Knox has that language. We are very supportive of that effort to clean that up, because basically I think it was just a situation where not understanding the process that paying by check to an employee of a company versus to the actual business, it would be ideal to send the check to the business, not the employee, especially because of what we are seeing about employee theft and subcontractor theft. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield.
You did a great job. No questions. Thank you, ma'am. Is there anyone here from AT&T that were signed up? I saw them leave a while ago. Okay. Keith Thatcher.
I know it's late. Many of the previous speakers mentioned how brief they would be, but I want to let you know I'm here. I'm prepared to stay here as long as it takes, Representative, to convince Representative Byrd to support a strong metal theft bill. And,
we'll let y'all discuss that at after the meeting.
No, in the interest of time, I just want to say we're part of the coalition. As realtors, we manage a lot of rental property, and the theft has run rampant. It's getting worse and worse. We believe, quite frankly, what we're dealing with here is a case of the good actors, that is, many of the scrap dealers that testified talk about the extent they go to and videotaping and so forth. We think the problem we've got is that the good actors are protecting the bad actors. The good actors are opposed to any additional measure, to any additional regulation, which we believe are not overly burdensome. If you've bought any real estate recently and been in a real estate office, we deal with a lot of regulation. We don't think we're asking for much, and we think it's a problem that's run rampant, and we think that these minor steps are important. We'd urge your support, and want to thank Representative Ramsey and Williams for bringing this to your attention.
Well, you're about to get a chance to convince Shirley or Representative Byrd. She's got a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I'm just curious. For all of the, for the bad eggs that are out there,
yes, ma'am.
If there's 95% good and 5% are bad, how is it that we're going to fix the problem?
Well, I don't think it's the ratio. I would disagree with. I don't think that's entirely true. But I think the way we can fix the problem is for you to vote for and support this legislation. I believe that's a step in the right direction.
I believe you worked this system before.
But I want to continue to work, and I appreciate the concerns. Again, the truth of the matter is, Representative Byrd, her passion for protecting business has served my association well for many years, and I appreciate what she's bringing to the table at the appropriate time. We'll spend more time talking about that, but again, we don't believe this is overly burdensome. We believe this is targeting right people. We believe, quite frankly, my membership, when I tell them, well, the scrap metal dealers are concerned about having to get a photocopy machine and making a photocopy, their response is, they should be pleased to do that to drive out the problem. We're heavily regulated in the real estate business, and my brokers and agents go through all sorts of loops, and they do that because they want to ensure the public is protected. And if there's a bad actor in our business, they can be thrown out. And one final point, actually, Representative Byrd, you asked earlier, how many licensed scrap dealers are there in the state of Georgia? That's an interesting question. It's my understanding there are 0 licensed recyclers in the state of Georgia. That's part of the problem. There is no license. So if there's a bad actor, there's no way to clean it up. That's the problem we deal with. If there is a bad actor in the real estate business, you've got a means by which you can have that resolved. There's a board of commissioners. There's a whole structure. And it's interesting to note. I think Mr. Ramsey mentioned it earlier. We're unique in the Southeast in that not only do we not regulate scrap metal dealers at the state level, they have a preemption in the law that prohibits local governments from addressing the issue. So if your constituents in Cherokee County, for example, feel like they have a unique problem that needs to be addressed in Cherokee County, they have no right to do that. They cannot do that. They have to come to the state. So we feel that's problematic, and we'd like to see that addressed, quite frankly.
Representative Ramsey. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we'd like to give the local governments the opportunity to address this issue, since we feel like we've got a very weak state law. If we had a very strong state law, I think we'd stand with the scrap metal dealers and say, let's not burden you with more regulation. But because the state law is so weak, we'd like to give our citizens an opportunity in the counties and the cities to appeal to their local representation, their elected officials, and say, we need your help. And now they're told, sorry, even if I want to help you, I cannot help you. I know your husband served in local government, and I'm sure he would not be, it'd be awkward for him to tell friends, I can't help you, you've got to speak to my wife.
That's the way it works now, isn't it?
Not that that's not uncommon.
Exactly. And one other follow-up. All right, we are now working very hard to find some common ground for this legislation. So does this mean that in next year, then we're going to be at it again for some new regulations? I don't know. And this is always my concern here around the Capitol. You open a can of worms, and it continues to grow, and it's nuts.
Right. And I agree with you. That's not something we like to do. We don't like to come back year in and year out. That's why, again, we are asking for a very strong law, because we don't want to come back. We believe if we put in place a strong enough law, we can solve the problem in Georgia, and then you can move on to other issues. You know much better than I do the variety of issues you're expected to deal with and try to attack, and we don't want to waste your time year in and year out. But again, the 07 law has not done the job. We have gone to number 3 in the country, and so I would vehemently disagree with some of the earlier testimony about we're leading the nation, or we're example to the country. Well, we're number 3. I don't think that's leading the country. And also, I think it's important to note, several people have testified that the Ohio law is very tough, but the crime has risen. I would ask you to consider, what would the crime have done without that new tough law? I think Mr. Ramsey mentioned that new tough law hadn't even really had time to go into place. But imagine if they didn't have a tough law. If you talk about crime rising, are you arguing that less penalty for criminals creates less crime? I don't think that's true. I'm not an expert in that field. I have an associate degree in criminal justice, and my college was a long time ago. But I think additional penalties and regulation reduce crime, and that's why we're here today. Not to be overly burdened. Don't want to overburden them.
Representative Ramsey.
I just want to speak to Representative Byrd's point about.
Y'all are going to have so much fun Monday.
I know. I'm thinking about requesting a seat change between.
Not a bad idea.
Frankly, I'm a little scared. Frankly, I'm a little scared of Representative Byrd. I agree, 100% agree with the statement that Mr. Boulay made, that the vast majority, and Ms. Zach made, that the vast majority of the scrap metal recyclers in Georgia are not knowingly accepting stolen property. So, but I will concede that point. But there are a lot of instances, the vast majority of instances, where it's being unknowingly accepted, where stolen property is making onto recyclers' yard, even though they're diligently complying with the laws. They're going above and beyond the law. You've heard them going above and beyond the yard, but stolen copper is making it onto their yard. So then you have a situation where the law enforcement then they have to investigate that crime, and the recycler's done everything they can. What the bulk of this proposal is to provide them the additional tools to go after. I mean, it's not a differentiating the good guys and the bad guys. The bad guys that are knowingly accepting stolen property, I hope they're being prosecuted to the extent of the law. But the vast majority of instances, it's being unknowingly accepted. And when that happens, there's still a crime that has to be investigated. That the law enforcement community agrees uniformly that this current law is not adequate. So we're trying to give them some more tools. So I'll leave that as a kind of food for thought. So, thank you, Mr. Hatcher.
Thank you, and I very much appreciate the time that you've each devoted to this issue. And the subcommittee spent many, many hours, and we do appreciate you taking the time to try to do what's right, strike that balance, and protect the people. So thank you very much.
Well, let me say I appreciate all the committee members that hung with me on this non-legislative day, and for all you that came out to hear and testify on this, I appreciate it very much. And everyone have a very safe weekend, and we'll be voting on amendments and this bill on Monday, I believe, after adjournment, according to Chairman Gullett. So y'all have a safe day.